Honorable members, the prayer. Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our Queen and to her government, to members of the Legislative Assembly and to all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the province wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideas, but laying aside all private interest and prejudice, keep in mind their responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all. Honorable members, please remain standing as we are led in the singing of God Save the Queen by Ms. Brooklyn Alhard. Honorable members, please be seated. I got a statement, Shannon. Members, March 20th is International Francophonie Day, and 2021 marks the 51st year of Le Journal International de Francophonie. On this day, Franco-Albertans joined 300 million Francophones from around the world celebrating the French language and the diverse culture. As many of you know, Alberta's Francophonie heritage dates back more than 200 years to the earliest days of the fur trade, which was largely responsible for bringing voyagers westward. French language and culture were integral parts of our province's growth and development, and they continue to enrich the lives in many important ways. Today's Francophonie is made up of people who have been here for generations, along with French-speaking newcomers, Anglophones who have chosen to learn French and immerse themselves in the language and the culture. I am aware of more than a dozen members of this assembly who are fluent French speakers, and opportunities are greater than ever for Albertans to learn the language. This paints a hopeful future for the Francophonie in our province. Please join me in recognizing Franco-Albertans and Francophonies from all around the world as we celebrate International Francophonie Day on Saturday, March 20th.
Introduction of visitors.
Honorable members, we have a very special guest in the Speakers Gallery joining us today. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Miss Darlene Reed, the wife of the member for Livingston McLeod, as well as Speaker Mom, my actual mom, Mary Cooper.
Introduction of guests. Ministerial statements. Member statements.
The honourable member for Edmonton City Centre has a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I rise to speak for my constituents and stakeholders in Edmonton City Centre. From business owners to baristas, students to seniors, executive suites to the city streets, they have told me straight. They want to see their provincial tax dollars invested in concrete action to end the crisis of houselessness. And they are clear that the solution isn't more shelters, it's permanent supportive housing with wraparound services. That's what I told the Minister of Community and Social Services when she kindly met with me in July 2019. I outlined Edmonton City Council's plan to build 900 units and the need for provincial funding to support health and social services at each site, rather than giving more to problematic shelter providers. I trust that she's shared this at the cabinet table, as they've considered Mayor Iveson's repeated requests for support, including his most recent for $5.9 million. If she has, though, it's clear her voice hasn't been heard. While the Government of Canada and City of Edmonton have committed over $50 million for 210 units, consecutive UCP budgets have instead doubled down on the same broken shelter system without a single new dollar dedicated to permanent supportive housing. All while this government has disrupted supports like AISH, income supports, and rent supplements that keep individuals housed. And their lack of action, Mr. Speaker, is now blocking the City of Edmonton from accessing federal funding for 480 more units. More federal dollars that could be creating jobs, building real solutions to the community needs are being left on the table because this government refuses to commit 1/5 of the budget of their embarrassment of an energy war room. An investment that would ensure safety, support, and dignity for hundreds of unhoused Albertans while saving millions for our health, justice, and social support system. So, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of my constituents, I'm calling on this government to do the right thing for unhoused Albertans, for our communities, and the future of our city and province, and immediately commit $5.9 million to operate 210 units of permanent supportive housing in Edmonton.
Hear, hear. The honourable member for Fort McMurray-Lac-La-Biche.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Budget 2021 is an incredibly important one, especially in the circumstances in which our province currently faces. This was a budget focused primarily on two things: the lives and livelihoods of Albertans. After a year of the pandemic, the economic impacts that we have felt because of it, along with the unprecedented drop in oil prices from the Saudi-Russia price war, our province needs a boost. Along with the progress that we are making with vaccines, this budget gives us the boost we need to support our economic recovery and our continued fight against the pandemic. Unfortunately, Mr. Speaker, the members opposite have been less than supportive. Just yesterday, they made their position crystal clear. They opposed the historic supports that Budget 2021 delivers. The NDP opposed $1.25 billion for COVID-19 health response. They opposed a historic $900 million increase in the health budget. They opposed a $120 million increase to increase surgical capacity and reduce wait times for surgeries. Mr. Speaker, it's astonishing, but it doesn't stop there. The NDP opposed $500 million in capital investments for our continuing care facilities. They even opposed $246 million to finish the construction at the Jeans Wisdeski Centre right here in Edmonton, in a constituency represented by an NDP MLA. Their opposition to job-creating capital projects didn't stop there. Their opposition to Budget 2021 means that they opposed a $6 million to finish Willow Square continuing care centre that will support the seniors within my riding of Fort McMurray-Lac-La-Biche. It's not just healthcare infrastructure either. They can't even support a budget that funds 14 new school projects, one of them to expand elementary capacity in the community represented by the member for Lethbridge West. It's a head-scratcher. Mr. Speaker, frankly, the NDP should ditch the extreme partisan opposition to all of these investments and support this government's plan to protect the lives and livelihoods of Albertans.
The honourable member for Calgary-Fish Creek.
Mr. Speaker, 2020 bore witness to the strongest headwinds the global airline industry has ever faced, with 2021 bringing further turbulence to an already uncertain flight path. Loss of vital air routes, termination of talented employees, parking of hundreds of aircraft, and in some cases, the suspension of entire operations. To remain airborne, Canada's airlines have had to meet stringent health protocols, be vigilantly compliant with a patchwork of regulations, all while working with employees and guests in managing expectations and pandemic-driven perceptions. Mr. Speaker, while we empathize with the lives and livelihoods impacted by this near shutdown, this fast-paced and competitive industry remains grounded by the lack of regulatory certainty, the spectre of heightened restrictions, the absence of targeted relief, and a failure to sustain operationally feasible protocols at Canada's airports. It's clear from our control tower that broader cooperation and timely action is required to protect our airlines, airports, and vitally important visitor economies. Mr. Speaker, it's time to remind all Canadians, particularly our leaders, of the important role our airlines play in functioning of a modern and global economy. Pre-pandemic, Canada's airlines transported 80 million passengers annually, employed 60,000 Canadians, and through their broad commercial impact, they indirectly supported an estimated 630,000 mortgage-paying jobs. Our lives, livelihoods, and lifestyles have become inextricably linked with timely and global movement of people and goods. From pandemic-driven e-commerce to life-saving movements of PPEs and vaccines, we also gratefully live in a world where people can connect, rejoin, rejoice, and be enthralled by peoples, cultures, and nature on a scale scarcely imagined just a generation ago. Mr. Speaker, These are the forgotten, much coveted privileges that we must vow never to take for granted as we collectively face the perilous challenges of an industry in crisis while bringing focus, resolve, advocacy, and leadership to our modern-day battle for the skies. Thank you.
The honourable member for Edmonton Whitemud has a statement to make.
Mr. Speaker, today the Canadian Centre for Policy Alternatives released a report on the effect of COVID on childcare in Canada, and the results for Alberta are not good. Edmonton, with a decrease of 10,000 children in childcare, ranks in the top 10 for enrollment drops. In Calgary, that number is 7,000. But while enrollment has gone down, parent fees are rising. Both Calgary and Edmonton are in the top 10 for percentage fee increases. In Edmonton, parents now pay an average of $950 per month for their toddler. In Calgary, $1,250 per month. And the report notes this doesn't even take into account the increases expected when the $25 per day program ends later this month. Not surprisingly, in cities with lower fees, parents were more likely to keep their children enrolled in childcare. Seems pretty obvious. Here are some other numbers Albertans should be aware of. 3,000, the number of unemployed early childhood educators in Alberta. 54%, the percentage of monthly income a family in Calgary pays for 2 kids in childcare if they make just over the subsidy limit. $57, the average cost per childcare in Calgary. $0, the amount per day low-income subsidized families paid under the $25 per day pilot program. 1/4, the amount of the childcare budget blown by the UCP on the one-time working parent benefit that won't do anything to help working parents next month. $4, the return on investment for every $1 put into childcare. $6 billion, the potential GDP growth if the $25 per day program was province-wide. 42,500, the number of Albertans who could get back to work if $25 per day childcare was expanded. And $0, the increased investment in childcare by this government this year. The UCP is hiding behind their ideology of parent choice, but parents who can't find, afford, or access childcare do not have choice. They're pushing families into unlicensed childcare or out of the workforce altogether. So, Mr. Speaker, this is a message to Alberta parents and childcare providers. The NDP understands what you need to get back to work and the benefit of quality early learning for your children. And we won't stop until all Alberta families have access to universal, quality, affordable childcare.
The honourable member for Calgary East has a statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It has been a year now since this tremendous challenge for our province began. Alberta has already experienced years of economic downturn, low oil prices, and a government without its priorities in order. Since 2014, many of Calgary's constituents lost huge amount of their income or their jobs. Families were struggling to put food on the table and to pay their bills. When Alberta was hit with this unprecedented happening brought by the COVID-19 economic shutdown and a total collapse of oil prices, our government was ready. This challenge we are facing did not break the Albertan spirit of strength and resilience, which provides a great help for us to get through this. Health measures secured us to limit the spread of the virus, at the same time protecting the lives of all Albertans and maintaining their livelihoods to safely operate. The government has made sure that all supports were available, especially to those who needed them most. Whether you are self-isolating, a small business owner, a worker, or a student, I have visited businesses in Calgary East to encourage them to make use of relaunch grant for them to remain open and ease their financial burden. And also I have delivered food hampers to those self-isolating. I want to ensure my constituents that our government is working tirelessly to create more jobs, bolster the economy, and get our province stay on track through our recovery plan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Edmonton Gold Bar has a statement to make.
Yesterday at the Rural Municipalities Association Convention, the Minister of the Environment was confronted by municipalities from all along the eastern slopes who had grave concerns about the potential negative impact that future coal mines will pose to water quality and water quantity. On Tuesday, the RMA passed a resolution with 85% support calling on the province to ensure that southwestern Alberta municipalities continue to receive adequate supplies of uncontaminated water. The RMA is worried about the government's proposal to open water allocations in the Oldman River Basin to take water from ranchers and municipalities and give it to coal mines. Municipalities wanted the Environment Minister to say in no uncertain terms that their water was not at risk. How did the Environment Minister respond? By gaslighting them. Alberta continues to have some of the most rigorous water license rules and environmental rules when it comes to the protection of water, said the Environment Minister. There's nothing changing to the water process or the licensing process in that area. I know there are rumors that it is, but it is not. That statement sure raised some eyebrows because it directly contradicts what the minister has been telling municipalities all winter. A slide deck prepared by his department, dated November 20th, 2020, openly discusses changing the Old Man Water Allocation Order to allow billions of liters of water to be transferred from irrigation users and municipalities to industrial users. And by industrial users, the minister means coal mines. This slide deck has been presented to many of the municipalities who voted in favor of the RMA resolution, but now, according to the minister, official documents and meetings are just rumors. The minister needs to stop covering up what he's doing with the Old Man River Allocation Order and just clearly communicate his plan. But continuing to deny the truth and treating Albertans like suckers to be played will do nothing to protect the water in the Old Man River and all those whose health and jobs depend on it. All it will do will ensure the minister and all of his colleagues are unemployed after the next election.
The honourable member for Spruce Grove, Stony Plain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As a devout Christian, I have seen firsthand the resilience of our religious communities. Communities of all faiths, whether Christian, Jewish, Muslim, Sikh, Hindi, and others, have shown remarkable resilience during this difficult and stressful time. And I am grateful for this resilience because it is during times of difficulty and uncertainty that faith becomes so much more important. For Christians, the importance of faith during tough times can be expressed by Psalm 18:2, which says, "The Lord is my rock, my fortress and my deliverer. My God is my rock in whom I take refuge. He is my shield and the horn of my salvation, my stronghold." Faith of all forms is a sturdy force in our lives, which helps guide us down a right and just path, even when a chaotic world surrounds us. And that is why I'm proud that our government has put the highest amount of flexibility and freedom for religious communities and congregational worship across Canada. While other provinces have implemented strict across-the-board capacity rules, and some have even restricted all worship services, we have allowed our places of worship to continue to perform the vital services that benefit our communities and our mental health. I would like to thank all the places of worship in Spruce Grove and Stony Plain and across Alberta for your resilience and your dedication to your community and worshipers. Places of worship across this province have done an incredible job in ensuring that worship services are safe for worshipers during the pandemic. By dutifully sanitizing, wearing masks, following the lenient capacity requirements, and providing online services for those who may have health problems or other worries, our places of worship have shown that no pandemic can stop us from our constitutional right of religion and worship. Thank you to all the pastors, priests, imams, rabbis, and other religious leaders who continue to provide this essential service to our communities. May God continue to watch over us during this difficult time and give us the strength we need to get through it. Thank you.
The honourable member for Vermilion, Lloydminster Wainwright.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Residence and Recovery Program, which is stationed in Lloydminster, has been an invaluable aid for those struggling with addictions and recovery. The program offers a vast suite of services that aim to help patients overcome their addiction and return to a life as normal again. The program currently has 4 houses and is capable of housing 25 individuals. The program is also partnered with the Thorpe Recovery Centre in Blackfoot. Residence and Recovery offers pre-treatment sober living facilities. These are for the phases between jail or detox. Residents must be sober for 7 days in order to qualify for this support and can last anywhere from 1 to 5 months. The program also offers post-treatment living facilities for up to 1 year. During this year, residents can utilize services such as a variety of therapies aimed at recovering and learning valuable life skills. Residence and Recovery also offers outpatient addiction services, which includes day programming and treatments such as psychoeducational programming and trauma therapy. This program has received 3 separate funding grants from the Alberta government, the most recent which was $40,000. And this money is just another piece of the historic funding our government has provided to mental health and addictions. They have been able to use this recent funding to create specialized treatment groups for men and women. In the future, Residence and Recovery Program is hoping to add more houses so they can provide more help for more individuals. The program is also hoping to eventually add an equine assisted learning service to their list of current helpful tools. Finally, the program would like to expand to be able to provide a family-focused post-treatment program.
The Residence and Recovery Program is truly making a difference in the lives of those battling to overcome addiction. I'd like to thank the Residence and Recovery for all the work they do to help struggling residents of Lloydminster to attain a better and brighter addiction-free future. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable members, the time is 1:50. It's oral question period, and the Leader of Her Majesty's Loyal Opposition has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the Environment Minister told municipal leaders that expanding coal mines on the eastern slopes wouldn't threaten our watersheds. After this bold pronouncement, the minister refused to take questions. Never a good sign. Needless to say, no one was convinced, not even the Reeve of Pincher Creek, who heard the minister speak and still wants to know just where the heck these mines are getting their water from. Premier, the Old Man River Basin is stretched thin. Why don't you do Albertans a favor and commit to supporting our bill to defend our mountains and protect the water in that basin?
The Honourable, the Premier.
Well, as is usually the case, Mr. Speaker, the entire premise of that question was false. There have been no changes to the water allocation. The member may be aware that stakeholders in southern Alberta spent several years in developing the South Saskatchewan River land use planning framework. There have been no changes to that framework or to water allocation rules, and nor have there been changes to diminish Alberta's world-leading environmental protections, including for water quality all across our province.
Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, allow me to educate the Premier. It turns out that folks that work for him and his Minister of Environment took the time in November to consult with people in the Old Man Water Basin. And they proposed a number of things, including the reallocation of almost 40% of the water from agriculture to coal. Not surprisingly, people are very distressed that this proposal was made. Why won't the Premier come clean and commit to those folks that they are not going to ever be facing that proposal for their water in that basin?
The Honourable the Premier.
Yeah, well, Mr. Speaker, I can imagine how they would characterize it if I stood up and said, let me educate the member on the following. Mr. Speaker, they dish it out, but they can't take it, Mr. Speaker, and they certainly can't take the facts or the truth, because the facts are that there is consultation going on with respect to improving water habitat for fish in the Old Man Dam and the Old Man River system, Mr. Speaker, and secondly, with respect to the overall water availability for all of those who draw in the municipalities in that area, Mr. Speaker. It's perfectly normal. It's what we should be doing.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, it's one thing for members opposite to gaslight Albertans, but watching the Premier get advice from his Minister of Environment, it appears as though his Minister of Environment is gaslighting his boss. The fact is this: the documents that were presented to the people of southern Alberta proposed an allocation of almost 40% to industry, particularly coal. Why don't you learn the file, and more importantly, why won't the Premier commit that those documents are done and that the water basin will be protected?
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, yes, the water basin will remain being protected, Mr. Speaker. We've been absolutely clear about that. Yes, there has been ongoing consultations in the Old Man River region, primarily around fish habitat, making sure that we could make sure there's enough water for fish in that area, Mr. Speaker. There's some of the most endangered fish within the world within that corridor of our province, Mr. Speaker. There is no proposal that has been put forward from my office or from Alberta Environment and Parks to change the allocation for water to go to coal mines, Mr. Speaker. That is completely and utterly false.
The Order, the Leader of the Official Opposition for a second set of questions.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we will table those documents, and I look forward to having the minister then get up and explain how he didn't know what was going on. Now, the pandemic has had tremendous impacts on all sectors, including agriculture. While Alberta's producers have had a good year with strong markets, it's clear these benefits are not even, and many producers are still struggling. Ottawa's Agri-Stability Program supports producers who've lost revenue through no fault of their own. It used to kick in at 85% of previous revenue until Stephen Harper lowered it to 70%. Now, the current Ottawa government wants to raise it back to 80%, but the Premier is blocking it. Premier, why won't you sign on? Producers want to know.
The Honourable the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, to be blunt, the last person in this province I'm going to take advice from on agriculture policy is the Edmonton Socialist who imposed Bill 6 on our farmers that we repealed with the Farm Freedom Act, Mr. Speaker, and she wouldn't understand this. But I can tell you, the fifth-generation farmer who is Alberta's ag minister certainly does, that we want the best possible deal for Alberta farmers, and that's why all three prairie provinces are working together to get the best possible deal through negotiations and a vote in this cost-shared program, Mr. Speaker.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Well, I know the Premier likes to live in the past, but producers would like him to pay attention to the present. The timing of this proposal still gives the Government of Alberta enough wiggle room to come up with its own program later, if that's what they want to do. The new agreement would only cover producers until 2023. There are no risks here. I don't see how signing this now does anything to get in the way of that. All it does is support Alberta producers while delaying for the sake of politics actually hurts them. Premier, when will you stop using rural Albertans as a political prop and start standing up for them?
The Honourable Premier.
Mr. Speaker, rural Albertans were the last consideration of the previous NDP government when they tried to unionize the family farm with Bill 6. Do you remember that, Mr. Speaker? And I'll tell you, this agriculture minister, a fifth-generation Alberta farmer, is going to do everything possible to get the best program and to have a proper negotiation and a vote amongst the provinces and the federal government. We're not going to have Justin Trudeau forcing a farm program on Alberta farmers without the provinces having to say. And yesterday, Mr. Speaker, the NDP voted against every single farm support program run by the government of Alberta. Shame on them.
Leader of the Opposition.
Politics over results, Mr. Speaker. Here's what those producers actually are saying and what they want. Quote, Alberta's producer groups express urgency on the matter of the April 30th agri-stability enrollment deadline nears, or as it nears. Premier, I know your entire political strategy is about dividing and about attacking Ottawa, but producers have come together in an unprecedented way to beg you to step up, sign the document, give them the support they need, and then if you want to work something out better later, do it. But stop making them a political toy.
The Honourable Premier.
Well, Mr. Speaker, thanks for the shouting from the divider-in-chief of Alberta politics. I'll tell you what, she wedged rural and urban Albertans against each other in a despicable way with her Bill 6 effort to unionize the family farm. And that is why she lost every single rural seat in this province by a massive margin. And yesterday added insult to injury when she forced her caucus to vote against, in the estimates and in the budget, the funding of every single agricultural support program delivered by Alberta's government. Shame on the anti-farm NDP.
Point of order is noted at 1:58. The Honourable Member for Lethbridge West.
It's looking like the Laurentian elites on Bay Street are on the hunt to acquire ATB Financial. Detailed polling is being conducted by Angus Reid on a prospective sale of our bank to TD Canada Trust. They're going so far as to probe specific elements of the deal. The language in the poll is clear. It's a takeover, Mr. Speaker. I'll table the appropriate copies at the appropriate time. So to the Minister of Finance, has the minister or his political staff, officials, had any meetings or conversations about the sale of ATB to TD Canada Trust?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, President, Treasury Board.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have no idea what the member opposite is talking about. Mr. Speaker, right now, we're working hard to position this province for economic recovery and growth. That is our sole focus, Mr. Speaker, to create the most competitive business environment across the country. We will not be distracted by media reports from somewhere else in the nation.
Here are the Honourable Member for Lethbridge West.
It's clear, Mr. Speaker, from the polling that someone is actively exploring a sell-off of ATB. Someone is paying for detailed polling. One does not waste real money on a figment of the imagination, and it's possible that the Minister of Finance simply may not have full visibility on this. So will the Minister report back to Albertans by the end of the day that no government entity, agency, contractor, or consultant is exploring the sale of ATB to Bay Street, as this polling indicates?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the Alberta government is doing no such thing. Again, right now, Mr. Speaker, we are focusing on positioning the Alberta economy for disproportionate investment, attraction, and growth that will put tens of thousands of Albertans back to work, provide great opportunities for Alberta businesses. Mr. Speaker, in Budget 2021, we are proposing spending $21 billion on core infrastructure in this province. Mr. Speaker, why will the opposition not support that bill?
The member for Lethbridge West.
So the finance minister may not be able to explain who is message testing, but if it is his own government, I think it's reasonable to expect him to get back to Albertans by the end of the day. But the minister is able to give us his own message right now. So can the finance minister commit categorically right now in this House that as long as this government remains in office, they will not sell off ATB or any of its lines of business?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, we have no plans to sell ATB. Again, Mr. Speaker, we are focused on ensuring economic recovery and growth for this province. And Mr. Speaker, I call on the members opposite to support Budget 2021, a budget that positions this economy for growth, a budget that will put tens of thousands of Albertans back to work at a time they desperately need an opportunity. Shame on the members opposite for not supporting.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton West Henday.
Mr. Speaker, the UCP claims there's no issues with the Freedom of Information process, but one such request on their Aloha Gate scandal turned up just 7 records from the Premier's office. Mr. Speaker, there's clearly a cover-up afoot, as I now have hundreds of individual pieces of correspondence on this scandal, and journalists have said that they have the same. So, to the Minister of Service Alberta, how come you only handed over 7 records? What are you hiding, and will you release those records today?
The Honourable the Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Oh, Mr. Speaker, let me just say that it's fairly rich for the NDP to be complaining about not following the FOIP rules. The 26-17 and 2017-18 annual reports required by Section 86 of the FOIP Act were not released by the NDP when they were in government, breaking the law. So I'm not sure they should be lecturing anybody else about following the law around FOIP today.
The order. The Honourable Member for Edmonton West Henday.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to keep asking questions about this Aloha Gate cover-up until we get answers, and I promise you we will get those answers. Yesterday, the Minister of Transportation told me there was nothing wrong with the FOIP process when clearly there is. The Minister of Transportation also replaced the Minister of Municipal Affairs after she vacationed in Hawaii while the rest of us stayed home to stop the spread of COVID-19. To the Minister of Transportation and Municipal Affairs, will you release all records related to Aloha Gate in both of your offices? If not, what are you hiding?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the NDP, again, complaining about FOIP is doubly rich. For those that have been around, we saw the then Minister of Health, the honourable member, stand up in this House and say, when we don't want people to know we use, and she actually used air quotes, she said, voice mode. Wow, Mr. Speaker, those folks, when they were in government, didn't want anybody to know what they were doing, so they used voice mode instead of writing things down. I'm not sure they're the ones to lecture anybody on privacy.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton West Henday.
So the government's response to past delays is that they're actually going to cut the budget for the FOIP process. When Albertans want to learn the objectives of government, a logical place to look is under the key objectives section in their business plans. It lays out their agenda clearly for the next year. However, the key objective for Service Alberta from 2020 to enhance government transparency and protection of personal information was removed from this year's report. Also, $1 million was cut from the budget this year. To the Minister of Service Alberta, the Premier, your boss, is the most untrusted Premier in the country. Is now really the time to be cutting off access to public records?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Well, once again, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member just never gets tired of being wrong. If they were paying attention, they would know that in December, this government launched a new online tool, the FOIP Request Service, which allows applicants to submit and track FOIP requests, pay fees, provide identification and documents, and receive response packages, all within a secure environment. we're taking action on transparency, Mr. Speaker, through the pro-FOIP process. The honourable member should try to keep up.
For Stony Plain Spruce Grove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, the members opposite voted unanimously against Budget 2021. Now, this is a budget focused on protecting both the lives and livelihoods of all Albertans and to ensure that they are supported during this pandemic. This budget includes $1.25 billion for COVID-19 supports and a $900 million increase to the operating budget of the Ministry of Health. It is unclear to me why the opposition doesn't feel these supports are necessary. To the Minister of Finance, could you please explain to the members opposite why this investment is so critical at this time?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance and the President of Treasury Board.
Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. Budget 2021's primary focus, number one priority, is ensuring that health is resourced to battle the pandemic, Mr. Speaker. Job number one. So we have included adequate funding, Mr. Speaker, in the baseline budget of health, as well as a COVID contingency line for health to be able to adequately deal and battle the pandemic on behalf of Albertans, Mr. Speaker. I want to thank the Minister of Health and his officials for doing an excellent job of the vaccine rollout, Mr. Speaker. I call on the opposition to support the bill.
The Honourable Member for Spruce Grove Stony Plain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister for that answer. Given that Budget 2021 includes a capital plan that spends $20.7 billion for critical infrastructure projects, and given that this includes the building of the La Crete Maternity and Community Health Centre, upgrades to a NICU centre at Foothills, and a $268 million in new funding to build and modernize 14 new school projects, some of which are even located in the members opposite's own ridings. To the same minister, can you please explain to the members opposite how troubling it is that they voted against these projects?
The Honourable the Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. It is troubling, Mr. Speaker, that the members opposite will not support Budget 2021, which includes a capital plan over the next 3 years of almost $21 billion. Mr. Speaker, projects included in the capital plan are the completion of the Calgary Cancer Centre, 8 new ICU beds at the Rocky View General Hospital, and 19 new neonatal intensive care beds at the Foothills Medical Centre, 14 new school projects across the province, and renovations for the Lac La Biche Youth Assessment Centre. Mr. Speaker, I could go on. I call on the members opposite to support.
The Honourable Member.
Mr. Speaker, given that the members opposite are opposing economic development with their vote against the budget, and given that yesterday they also voted against diversifying Alberta's economy, and given that they opposed $50 million for growing the film sector, $30 million for growing the tech sector, $22 million for growing tourism, and $500 million for growing other sectors such as pharmaceuticals, to the Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation, can you please tell the House what other diversification measures the NDP voted against in this budget?
Honourable the Minister of Jobs, the Economy and Innovation.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to that member for questions. You know what, Mr. Speaker, we're having a banner year in film and television. Just this week, Mr. Speaker, a brand new film studio going up in Alberta, Mr. Speaker. That is diversification. Failure on the other side, Mr. Speaker, when it came to film and television, Mr. Speaker. We're supporting the tourism industry, increasing the budget for Travel Alberta by 50% because we want to bounce back in tourism here in our province. Pharmaceuticals, Mr. Speaker, we have a Nobel Prize winner at the U of A. We want proposals right now, Mr. Speaker, to build out our pharmaceutical capacity in Alberta to keep Albertans healthy and diversify our economy.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
The UCP lifted the Lougheed coal policy on the advice of Australian billionaires because they want to strip mine our mountains. They expect Albertans to believe them when they say they will sincerely consult with Albertans about protecting our beautiful spaces. But the member for Calgary-Glenmore said she believes that the current suite of policies in place has struck the right balance. Minister, can you explain to Albertans if you actually believe that you're engaging in open-minded consultation when your own MLAs appear ready to continue to allow strip mining our natural areas?
The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Parks.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Energy is launching a consultation process when it comes to the 1976 coal policy. I hope the honourable member takes the time to participate. I know that members of our caucus will at the time when it comes forward. I appreciate the effort from the Minister of Energy, Mr. Speaker. And I think the biggest thing is that we have to continue to stand up against the fear-mongering and the things that are being made up by the NDP when they tell communities that mines have been approved or that water allocations have changed and these type of things. That's not taking place, Mr. Speaker. But Albertans can rest assured the Minister of Energy will proceed with consultation as promised.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Given the disdain this government has towards consulting Albertans was made clear when they tried to sneak the lifting of the Lougheed coal policy under the noses of Albertans on the Friday before the May long weekend, and given that the member for Calgary-Glenmore has already made up her mind on this critical issue and decided that listening to Albertans isn't worth her time. Minister, Albertans don't trust you when it comes to coal because of your secretive actions. How can people trust that these consultations aren't just for show?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the member from Calgary-Glenmore is actively participating in consultation. I've actually seen her speak about this lots with her constituents, and she's actually leading the climate change consultation across the province right now. Is a very active member and a hardworking MLA who represents her constituents well, Mr. Speaker. But what is misleading Albertans is the fact that that honourable member will not recognize in this place that almost all of the exploration that is taking place in the province was approved underneath that former member's government, Mr. Speaker. And he just doesn't want to talk about that. So let's be transparent about what the NDP approved inside the Eastern Slopes.
Point of order is noted at 2:10. The honourable member.
Well, given the Minister of Environment doesn't even understand the very damaging impact the coal mines will have on Alberta's most sensitive natural areas, including those utilized and treasured by his own constituents. Given that I will be hosting an online town hall about my legislation later this month and will be personally inviting the Minister's constituents to attend, and given that the Minister could just stand in this House for the first time ever and admit that he was wrong and pledge to support my bill, Minister, will you support my legislation so that you can go back to your constituents and tell them that you did the right thing for once?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Parks.
Mr. Speaker, my constituents are absolutely appalled at what the NDP continues to do. The fact is, any exploration that's taking place within my constituency in the Eastern Slopes started underneath the NDP government, Mr. Speaker, and there is no mine actually going through any regulatory process anywhere within my constituency, which yet again shows that the NDP just make things up, Mr. Speaker, and they're trying to distract from the fact that they voted yesterday against funding our healthcare system, funding our park system, funding our police, Mr. Speaker. That's the reality of what they focus on inside this chamber, Mr. Speaker, is trying to stop Alberta's budget from going into place.
Honourable member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last night, the Minister finally held a town hall to talk about Bill 57. Right after, I was contacted by Métis members frustrated with the lack of transparency and non-answers that were provided. The failure to properly consult was the big issue. The Minister said he gave 6 months for consultation, but multiple participants pointed out that this was during the height of the pandemic and that many members do not have cell service or internet connection to consult with safely. The only thing the Minister said was, "My hands are being tied." To the Minister, what do you think constitutes proper consultation? Why do you think you can ignore Métis concerns?
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And we did have a very robust discussion last night. In fact, for an hour, I took rapid-fire questions, and we had a very good discussion with a lot of members there and answered their concerns, Mr. Speaker. Over the past year, we've had over 19 engagements with myself and the department and their technicians discussing these amendments, Mr. Speaker. And beyond that, Mr. Speaker, I've traveled across the province and met with many of the settlements over the past year and met with their people, Mr. Speaker. A lot of these concerns are from their people looking at transparency, and that's what we're doing, Mr. Speaker, is preparing the Métis settlements for the future.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the Minister was asked what he will do when settlements can't afford their basic needs and their members can't afford to pay, and given that his answer was to levy additional fines on Métis people to make up for revenue shortfalls, the Minister actually went on to say that the Council can create bylaws to fine members and take them to court, and that this will generate more revenue for the settlements. To the Minister, this is reprehensible. Are you really expecting that the Métis settlements create new bylaws and fine their membership to make up for the loss of funding from your UCP government?
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and of course the member is wrong once again. Over the past couple of years, we've been working on what we've called the Alberta Indigenous Opportunities Corporation, Mr. Speaker, and we've made sure the Métis settlements are able to participate in that. Mr. Speaker, there's some very good programs coming forward, Mr. Speaker. They've asked me for a hand up, not a handout, Mr. Speaker. This is what we're giving them, is a hand up, to work with them to develop and give them that pride and ownership and working in their communities, Mr. Speaker. Nothing could be farther from the truth, and we're working hard with the Métis settlements always, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. given that another tool for settlements to generate new revenue is to start charging fees for services and new taxes. And given a participant last night had to ask the minister twice, what is this government going to do to help elders and lower income members when they're unable to pay the new fees and levies? And given the minister could not provide a reasonable answer or point to a specific program that we'd be bringing in to help with these additional fees, to the minister, you are increasing the cost of living for Métis people. Do you ever think of what real damage you are doing by forcing more Métis Albertans further into poverty without additional support?
The Honourable the Minister of Indigenous Relations.
Thank you, Speaker. Actually, any of the amendments we put forward are just empowering amendments, Mr. Speaker, giving them the flexibility to handle their own affairs, Mr. Speaker. We've given them the option. One of the options was to empower them if they want to go from 5 council members down to 3, Mr. Speaker. Some of the settlements are quite small, Mr. Speaker, so 3 council members would be quite sufficient. That would save them a couple $100,000 a year. I know that's not a lot of money to the members opposite, Mr. Speaker, but a couple $100,000 over a year, 10 years, that's $2 million. That's some real money, Mr. Speaker, and that's what we're working to help them be sustainable in the future.
The Honourable Member for Livingston-McLeod has a question.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. Alberta is home to some of the best healthcare facilities in the entire world. And let you know of a little secret, that not all these facilities are just in Alberta's large cities. There are fantastic hospitals and clinics throughout rural Alberta, and especially in my riding of Livingston-McLeod. But many of these facilities are in need of upgrades. Can the Minister of Health please let this House know what the government is doing to support rural health care?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member for the question. Earlier this week, the Premier announced the creation of the Rural Health Facilities Revitalization Fund. And Alberta taxpayers will be investing $50 million over 3 years to upgrade neglected rural health facilities. And for the members' riding of Livingston-McLeod, that means $1.5 million to upgrade the medical device reprocessing area in the Crow's Nest Pass Health Centre, $1.6 million to add to the ambulance garage at the Clares Home General, and $4.7 million to renovate the medical device reprocessing area at the High River General Hospital.
The Honourable Member for Livingston-McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for that response. Given that Alberta is a massive province that is dominated by rural communities, and given that Alberta's economy relies on rural communities being both healthy and vibrant, and given the strong importance of sustainable health care to my constituents in Livingston-McLeod and constituents around rural Alberta, can the same minister let us know how this funding announcement continues to show our commitment to building a more sustainable healthcare system within rural Alberta?
Well, the Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to see the members opposite so excited about this fund after their 4 years of ignoring these facilities. The Rural Health Facilities Revitalization Fund protects people's lives and health in rural communities and also protects their livelihoods by creating jobs as part of our multi-billion-dollar capital plan. The renovation projects are vital to modernizing smaller rural facilities to ensure that they offer the best and safest health services possible in all corners of the province. And no matter where people live in Alberta, it's important that their healthcare needs are met as close to home as possible, and these renovation projects make that a reality.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that the COVID-19 pandemic has put stress on our healthcare system, which has extended wait times for elective surgeries, and given that the government has focused much of its additional healthcare funding on dealing with the pandemic, can the Minister of Health explain to this House why he believes that this is important to fund these essential capital health projects in rural Alberta at this time?
The Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The priority projects have been identified in all 5 health zones across the province. The projects each ring in at $5 million or less and are expected to create about 280 construction jobs and stimulate the local economies. The funds are important to the upkeep, to the quality of care, and the long-term sustainability of our rural health facilities. And we're committed to improving rural health care and the services that Albertans can rely on. This is an important part of our ongoing work to strengthen our publicly funded healthcare system in Alberta.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Decore.
Quote, look, I guess whenever you attack red tape, there could be unintended consequences. We saw that when it came to the coal policy. That was the Associate Minister of Red Tape at RMA talking about how his government's sneaky plan to strip mine the Rocky Mountains by lifting the Lougheed coal policy was just an unintended consequence of this minister's lust for slashing red tape. Minister, you have to be seriously incompetent to accidentally have the Rocky Mountains torn down?
No doubt.
What are you doing to prevent other catastrophic unintended consequences resulting from your actions?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Finance and the President of Treasury Board.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we inherited a government that was full of regulatory burden and red tape, that was limiting the actions and opportunities for Alberta businesses, entrepreneurs, Alberta families, Alberta nonprofit organizations. Mr. Speaker, I could go on. We have made a high priority of reducing regulatory burden, modernizing our regulatory environment, Mr. Speaker, so we can compete in the modern economy. We make no apology for that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton to Court.
Well, given that in a FOIP we received from the Department of Finance, it was revealed that the Associate Minister of Red Tape failed to hit his own targets by more than 60%,
wow.
Which in anyone's eyes is a failing grade, Mr. Speaker. To the Minister, is the reason why nearly destroying the eastern slopes of Alberta because you are rushing to catch up on the failure to meet your own targets? And if you were more competent the first time around, would Albertans have needed to fear for the future of our mountains and critical headwaters?
Yeah, yeah.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, you want to talk about incompetence when it comes to red tape. When this government came into power and took over from the NDP, Mr. Speaker, it took 3 years on average to get a grazing lease transferred, Mr. Speaker. It took 7 years on average, Mr. Speaker, to get a simple water license if you're a municipality or a homeowner, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to report now it takes about 30 days to get a grazing lease transfer, Mr. Speaker, and about 60 days to get a simple water license, Mr. Speaker. That's competence, Mr. Speaker, and we're proud of our Minister of Red Tape, Mr. Speaker, leading the way to be able to help Alberta get back to work.
The Honourable Member.
Given that at the RMA Forum, the Minister attempted to justify his mistakes and failures, blamed the amount of regulations he's trying to eliminate, and given that he literally conceded he would make mistakes as he races to slash red tape to hit some fictional goal set by his boss, what other essential protections is this minister trying to eliminate so he can justify keeping his ministerial salary? Workplace safety, food safety, maybe water safety?
Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, President of Treasury Board has risen.
Mr. Speaker, this government inherited a regulatory environment that received an F from the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, brought on by the members opposite incompetence in working through the regulatory process. Mr. Speaker, the members' incompetence on the other side of the aisle left Alberta businesses disadvantaged, uncompetitive. It sent billions of dollars of investment out of this province, Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Red Tape Reduction is reversing that investment flow with an aim.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Whitemud.
On February 10th, the Minister of Children's Services told childcare providers in writing that the only requirements for early childhood educators to be eligible for the critical worker benefit was to have worked, quote, 243 hours total between October 12th and January 31st. Around the same time, her ministry told childcare programs, quote, the $25 per hour cap will not apply. Fast forward a few weeks and suddenly the $25 per hour cap does apply. This means more than 1/4 of all early childhood educators in Alberta don't qualify for this benefit. To the minister, do you remember telling childcare workers you valued their work during the pandemic, or was that a mistake too?
The Honourable Minister of Community and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Community group care workers and support staff, as well as early childhood educators, have played a critical role in keeping children and youth safe and healthy throughout the pandemic. In a letter to childcare providers on March 9th, Children's Services explained payments would be distributed to all licensed daycare, group family childcare, out-of-home care, and contracted family day home agencies on behalf of early childhood educators who have worked at least 243 hours between October 12, 2020 to January 31st, 2021, and are paid $25 an hour or less before the government wage top-up.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Whitemud.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given that I think early childhood educators already read that letter, given that workers who cook meals and snacks and keep up with the vigorous COVID cleaning requirements to ensure children are healthy, safe, and fed in childcare programs are also inexplicably excluded from the critical worker benefit, and given that workers who perform these same cooking and cleaning services in other settings in children's services and in other parts of the social services sector, they are eligible, but these workers are not, to the same minister, why have you made arbitrary distinctions about which work is critical in childcare when all of it is essential?
The Honourable the Minister of Community and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, given the large scale of this initiative across many sectors, eligibility requirements vary slightly between sectors. For the child care sector, this benefit is focused on certified early childhood educators, as they have the most direct contact with children and parents and are therefore at most risk of contracting COVID-19. This does not minimize the importance of the work done by other child care support staff during the pandemic.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given if that member had actually been in a child care centre, she would know that workers who are cleaning and cooking are in direct contact with children all the time. And given that more than 3,000 early childhood educators have left the sector since the pandemic hit, and let's be clear, that workforce is predominantly women, and given that the only reason the child care sector has survived this pandemic at all is thanks to the federal government, because this government does not believe child care is critical to economic recovery, to the minister, why is it that whenever you've had the opportunity to do the right thing for the thousands of women who work in the child care sector, the working parents who rely on it to get back to work, and children of this province, you always do the wrong thing?
The Honourable the Minister of Community and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, the Ministry of Children's Services is incredibly grateful for the work unlicensed providers do in caring for kids and families across Alberta, as they play a vital role in ensuring parents have flexible options for childcare. By being unregulated and unlicensed, they are not subject to the same stringent rules and regulations that others are, nor are they expected to pay for things like licensing fees. But I want to say again that none of this minimizes the importance of the work done by other child care support staff during the pandemic.
The Honourable Member for Airdrie Cochrane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the 2019 election campaign, a promise was made by this now government, one that I too made to the constituents of Airdrie Cochrane in regards to holding elected officials accountable through recall legislation. Politicians are elected by the people and should be accountable to the people through their entire term, not just during election periods. With that said, reversing the will of the people should not be an easy task. To the Minister of Justice, can you please provide a summary of what will be required to recall an elected official?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice and the Solicitor General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member for that very important question. Mr. Speaker, recalling an MLA is a two-step process. First, a citizen must start a petition by submitting an application to the Chief Electoral Officer explaining which elected official should be recalled and why. Then they must collect signatures from 40% of eligible voters in that MLA's constituency. If the petition is successful, Mr. Speaker, then a recall vote will be held in that constituency, and if a simple majority of the voters agree, then that MLA is recalled and a by-election will be held to replace that MLA, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable the Member for Airdrie Cochrane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Given that we campaigned on introducing recall legislation in 2019, and given that the cynics on social media have been claiming that it is an empty gesture that will never be successful, to the same minister, can you provide assurances to my constituents that this legislation will provide meaningful reform to voters across Alberta?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice, Solicitor General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we govern for the people of Alberta. They told us in the last election that they wanted voter recall, and Mr. Speaker, we have delivered on that commitment and promise. Of course, Mr. Speaker, there are the cynics who lack the vision and will to deliver sustainable democratic reform. Mr. Speaker, this government delivered. The United Conservatives believe that voters should be given the opportunity to hold their elected officials accountable between elections. Voter recall will put Albertans in the driver's seat of our democracy.
For Airdrie Cochrane.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you again, Minister. Given that there are more than just members of this Assembly that are elected in this province, and given that consultations were done with Albertans on this issue, and given that Albertans were clear about the range of elected positions they wanted to be part of this legislation, to the Minister, can you let this House know who will be subject to recall, and when will it come into force?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am proud to say that here in Alberta, we took recall one step further than in British Columbia. Albertans won't just have the ability to recall provincial officials, but other local elected officials as well. School board trustees, municipal councillors, mayors, and reeves could be subjected to recall election. If passed, Mr. Speaker, we expect this legislation to come into effect later this fall. Another promise made, Mr. Speaker, another promise kept.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Ellerslie has a question.
In a province that prides itself on multiculturalism and respect for diversity, multiple black Muslim women were attacked for being black, for being women, and for being Muslim. We need to send a strong message that hate-motivated crimes are absolutely unacceptable. That is why I call upon the government to establish a provincial hate crimes unit and publish the record of its enforcement. Premier, consider that perpetrators of hate crimes look at the government's actions or lack thereof to see if they can act with impunity. Will you create such a unit and publish its record of enforcement?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice and Solicitor General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can assure this House that anyone out there who commits crimes, hate crimes, or any crime of any nature in this province would have and face the full consequences of the law. Mr. Speaker, we condemn acts of racism and discrimination against our minority communities, especially our Muslim women and sisters and brothers. Mr. Speaker, as Minister of Justice, I am committed to making sure that we build a province in which everyone who calls this province home gets to thrive and live their full potential.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Ellerslie.
Given that these black Muslim women were attacked, are all Albertans just like everyone else? And given that this government is supposed to take care of all Albertans, which is why after the 2017 Quebec mosque shootings, the NDP established the provincial's first anti-racism advisory council and working on creating a provincial hate crimes unit. And then the UCP acts to funding to anti-racism initiatives at a time when hate crimes were on the rise. And then given that the lack of action encourages perpetrators of hate crimes, why is the UCP not taking any substantial actions to address hate crimes and prevent future ones?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, let me assure this House once again that this government, and on this side of the aisle, that we are committed to make sure that everyone in this province is treated with respect and the dignity that they deserve. Mr. Speaker, as Justice Minister, I and many of my colleagues have held town halls across our province with our cultural community to assure them that this province is their home and that they will be protected. And Mr. Speaker, in the months to come, we are going to be rolling out all kinds of programs and services to make sure that everyone in this particular province who will commit crimes against our people are held to full account.
The Honourable Member.
Given that these women were just going about their lives when someone decided to target them, yelled racial slurs, threatened to kill them, and physically attacked them, and given that understandably these incidents traumatized the victims, and given that we're behind BC and Ontario who already have a provincial hate crimes unit, and Premier, given that these calls for a provincial hate crimes unit came out of consultations with various cultural groups across Alberta, how can you justify lack of action on a provincial hate crimes unit, and will you act now?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the simple answer is yes, I would act, and this government have continued to act. Mr. Speaker, if members of this House recall, in November of 2020, we banned the practice of carding. The number one problem that the members from cultural communities have complained for decades. Mr. Speaker, before the steps of this legislature, 2016 to 2018, the members from my community and other cultural communities came here to protest. They pleaded with the members opposite to ban the practice of carding. They did not. Mr. Speaker, this is about action. This is not about talk.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Results from a Freedom of Information request show that last year the government gave more than $20 million to landowners to cover oil and gas companies who were delinquent on their payments to landowners. This is a 3,000% increase from 2010. This hurts responsible producers and unfairly burdens the taxpayers. private companies should fulfill their obligations, not the taxpayer. Can the minister promise that action will be taken to recover the money paid to landowners on behalf of taxpayers?
The Honourable the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Finance and Minister of Municipal Affairs may want to get up shortly and talk about recovery processes in greater detail. But, Mr. Speaker, what I do want to do is inform the House the hard work this government has done when it's come to surface rights payments inside this province, Mr. Speaker. Underneath the former NDP government, landowners were waiting upwards of 3 years to have their day in court, Mr. Speaker. And together, the Ministry of Environment with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and the Minister of Finance, Mr. Speaker, we were able to get full funding to the Surface Rights Board for the very first time, Mr. Speaker. And that's why we're seeing the increased payments, Mr. Speaker. And at the end of the day, that's the right thing to do, Mr. Speaker, because this government respects landowners, unlike the NDP.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Goldbar.
Given the minister missed the point and that I was asking him to recover the money from the oil companies, and given that the government gave a huge tax cut to those same companies, and given that taxpayers are already supporting the industry to address well site liabilities without sufficient assurances from the taxpayer, and given that unpaid obligations are a reputation risk to our industry in our province, can the minister promise that action will be taken this year to reverse this very concerning trend to protect landowners and taxpayers from letting oil companies off the hook?
The Honourable Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was at the last couple of days at the Rural Municipalities Association gathering here in Edmonton, just south of Edmonton, and I assured them that I would work with the municipalities, with our government, and with the industry to get paid back some of the money they're owed. RMA's own report shows that they are owed $245 million. That's just the rural municipalities, Mr. Speaker. It's something we take seriously. We've already started the work to see the best way to go forward.
The Honourable Member.
Given that municipalities are also struggling to recoup money from the industry, and given that municipalities are forced to support the industry without additional tax breaks, and given that landowners and municipalities are struggling due to the effects of COVID-19 and the downloading of the government, can the government promise anything more than hollow words from this minister and actually take action to develop a stronger regime to protect landowners, municipalities, and responsible producers? This is a responsibility of the Minister of Finance, and I would appreciate an answer from him.
The Honourable the Minister of Municipal Affairs.
Well, the honourable member should probably listen to the answer he's already gotten, because he just asked the question that he got an answer to 10 seconds before he asked the question. Since he can't think on his feet and think of a third question, it'll give me an opportunity to repeat the fact that we will continue, because it's important, to work with municipalities, to work with industry so that they can pay taxes to those municipalities and Albertans for the next decades to come, and work with our government to get this done. It's an important issue he does point to, the honourable member, and we are on it.
The Honourable Member for Airdrie East.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the pandemic, we have heard how vulnerable Albertans, especially those on AISH and income support, have struggled to make ends meet. The vulnerable already have challenges securing employment under present economic conditions, and with increased challenges of COVID, one would expect that the government would assist them where possible. Given that our government is investing over $1.3 billion into this program, Minister, what have you and your ministry done to support vulnerable Albertans accessing these benefits?
The Honourable the Minister of Community and Social Services.
Thank you to the Honourable Member for that question, and thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to speak to the disability community directly through you, Mr. Speaker, and say that I'm proud of them for taking such good care of themselves during this pandemic. It's been tough times, but they've done well. Alberta's government continues to support Albertans through the pandemic, including those on AISH and income support. I'm pleased to confirm that we have fully exempted CRB payments received by AISH and income support clients since the federal program was introduced last September. That exemption runs until the end of the month, meaning clients receiving CRB are not seeing any deductions right now on their provincial benefits.
The Honourable Member for Airdrie East.
Wonderful. Thanks, Minister. Given that vulnerable Albertans need our support now more than ever, and given that Alberta's government has fully exempted AISH and income support recipients from CRB payments, and further given that our government values protecting the lives and livelihoods of all Albertans, to the Minister, what financial impact did this exemption provide to clients accessing CERB and CRB? Did they see any true financial benefits, and if so, by how much?
The Honourable the Minister of Community and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, the government partially exempted CERB, meaning, for example, a single AISH client could have taken home about $2,400 in CERB and AISH benefits every month. While the CRB exemption is in place, a client receives the full benefit amount for which they are eligible from both CRB and AISH. I know many Albertans are struggling due to the pandemic, and these temporary exemptions are another way that this government is supporting vulnerable people.
Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. Given that our government has worked hard to ensure that every Albertan who needs support is supported, and given that the Minister of Community and Social Services is passionate and working diligently to help vulnerable Albertans, to the same Minister, how long will the exemption be in place, and once it ends, how long will it take for people to see a change in their benefit rates?
The Honourable the Minister of Community and Social Services.
Mr. Speaker, the exemption for CRB benefits is temporary and will be in place until the end of this month. That means clients still receiving CRB as of April 1st will see deductions from their May benefit payments. Mr. Speaker, Alberta's government continues to protect lives and livelihoods during the pandemic, and this exemption is one way that we are doing that amongst many others.
Honourable members, that concludes the time allotted for oral question period. In 30 seconds or less, we will return to member statements.
So sorry. Travis didn't take so long to answer.
The Honourable Member for Lesser Slave Lake has a statement to make.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to speak on a piece of Albertan and Canadian history. As on this day 47 years ago, 1974, the countries that were participating in the ongoing OPEC embargo of the United States and its closest allies came to an agreement to end the embargo. The world before and after the 5-month embargo was truly never the same, as the price of oil in March of 1974 was 300% higher than it was when it started in October of 1973. Mr. Speaker, this embargo served a poignant notice to governments across the First World and the entire world that a robust, independent foreign policy now also required a robust and independent energy policy, as for the first time, the oil market, which previously operated on a trend of consistency, gradual growth, and abundant supply, became uncertain and volatile. While Alberta saw tremendous increases in investment in our energy sector, we also saw a change in the federal-provincial relations as the federal government, under the ministry of the elder Trudeau, responded to this economic uncertainty with plans for a federal control over the energy sector, which culminated in the countrywide infamous National Energy Program. As the Premier himself spoke of yesterday, today's Trudeau government's carbon tax raises demonstrates an equally out-of-touch federal response to such uncertainties in our own time. As a proud Albertan and proud Canadian, I say that Canada does not just reap economic benefits when Albertan resources are expanded upon. Indeed, Canadian values, foreign policy, and our national security are all reaffirmed when Alberta is able to meet market demands. A true North strong and free and Canada free is only possible when every part of our Confederation is able to employ their God-given resources. And I hope, Mr. Speaker, all of my colleagues in this Assembly take the time to reflect on how we best can make that a reality. Thank you.
Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Presenting petitions. Notices of motions.
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give oral notice of Government Motion 69 to be put on the order paper in my name as follows. Be it resolved that 1. A select special committee on real property rights be established and consist of the following members: Segerson, Chair from Highwood; Rutherford, Deputy Chair; Ganley, Glasgow, Goodridge, Hanson, Jones, Milliken, Nielsen, Orr, Schmidt, and Sweet. 2. The committee's mandate is limited to the consideration of the following matters. A, whether legal remedies available to a real property owner who is deprived of the use of the real property are adequate. And B, whether the real property rights should be expanded or, in the case of an individual, constitutionally protected. And C, whether the law of adverse possession should be abolished. D, whether the expropriation process provided under the Expropriation Act are adequate. And E, any other matter the committee decides is necessary to ensure the completeness of its review. 5, the committee may, subject to the chair's approval, pay any reasonable costs necessary for the effective conduct of its responsibilities, specifically the cost of advertisement, staff assistance, equipment and supplies, rent, travel, and other similar costs. And 6, the committee may, during the course of its review, utilize the services of any of the following. A, the Legislative Assembly office employees, or B, subject to the approval of the head of a department or an office of the legislature, the public service employees of that department or office. And 7, no later than December 15, 2021, the committee must submit a report to the Assembly that set out some recommendations, if any. And 8, if the Assembly is not sitting on the day that the committee completes its report, the chair of the committee must, as soon as practicable, A, deposit the report with the clerk in accordance with Standing Order 38.1, and B, provide a copy of the report to each member of the Legislative Assembly.
Tabling returns and reports.
Are there tablings? The Honourable Member for Lethbridge West, followed by Goldbar.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to table the requisite number of copies of the poll conducted by Angus Reid, to which I referred in question period today, asking Albertans their thoughts on a takeover of ATB Financial by TD Canada Trust. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I have 2 tablings this afternoon. The first is an appropriate number of copies of a document produced by the Alberta canola producer saying Alberta producer organizations encourage the government of Alberta to accept the current agri-stability program. That is dated March 17th, 2021. And then my second tabling is a document that the Minister of Environment claims doesn't exist. It's entitled Old Man River Basin Water Allocation Order Information Briefing, prepared by Alberta Environment and Parks, dated November 20th, 2020.
Are there others? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Whitemud.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to table, I have 8 tablings today, and I'll beg your indulgence because they are from constituents from the fine constituency of Olds, Didsbury, Three Hills. These are 8 messages sent from Jennifer Parasini, Joy Zeverink, Jacqueline Norris, Dallas Goetzinger, Aaron Dezol, Sarah Thompson, Julius and Che Cabanton, Ayana and Anatoly Dudko. These are letters that were sent to the Honourable Member for Olds, Didsbury, Three Hills regarding the importance of the $25 per day program located in Olds and the positive impact it has had on their families, also asking that the program not be ended.
Good member, that. Are there others? Seeing none.
The clerk, deferred divisions.
Honourable members, we are at points of order, and at 1:58, the Deputy Opposition House Leader raised a point of order, which he later withdrew, and at 2:10, he also raised a point of order, which we will hear now.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the time of my point of order, my honourable colleague from Edmonton, Goldbar was asking a question in regards to the secretive actions that this government is taking regarding the low-heat coal policy and how it appears that this government had already made up its mind and was doing consultations for show. In reply, without the benefit of the blues, Mr. Speaker, the Honourable Government House Leader rose and said in this place, what is misleading Albertans is that honourable member and then went on and spoke at length about actions that the member had taken while in government. And Mr. Speaker, I think we know very clearly in this place that you cannot say indirectly what you cannot say directly. So, Mr. Speaker, I think that when this government House Leader rises in this place and states that the honourable member for Edmonton Goldbar is misleading Albertans, directly insinuates and makes allegations under 23 H, I, and J that an individual member of this place is misleading Albertans. I think that, Mr. Speaker, we know is something that is very clearly set in precedent, not allowed in this place. Thank you.
Will the Government House Leader?
Mr. Speaker, you have the benefit of a transcript, Mr. Speaker, while the honourable member who's asking me questions refers several times to me misleading. I do not do that. In fact, Mr. Speaker, what I say is that honourable member will not recognize in this place that almost all of the exploration that is taking place in the province was approved underneath that former member's government, Mr. Speaker. At no time do I say to that member that he was misleading this House, Mr. Speaker. I could list several exploration projects, Mr. Speaker, but I'm not going to waste your time with that today. It's clearly a matter of debate.
Thank you for your submissions. I do have the benefit of the blues. The Honourable the Government House Leader was answering a question and he said, but what is misleading Albertans is the fact that that honourable member will not recognize the place that almost all of, in this place, that almost all of the exploration that's taking place in the province was approved under that member's former government. I have said much on the record about when it is misleading and when it isn't misleading. I think a case can be made here that the Honourable Government House Leader was referring to, generally speaking, misleading Albertans, because in his following statement, he doesn't imply that that member was the one that was misleading Albertans. Again, when we try to walk this tightrope of what is parliamentary, what isn't parliamentary, it rarely ends well for everyone. At this point in time, I'll provide a caution to the Honourable Government House Leader. This isn't a point of order, but a caution is noted. I consider the matter dealt with and concluded. We are at orders of the day, orders du jour.
Under Government Bills and Orders for second reading, Bill 53, Service Alberta Statutes Virtual Meetings Amendment Act 2021, adjourned debate. Honourable Mr. Glubish.
Honourable members, is there anyone wishing to join in the debate this afternoon? I see the Honourable Member for Edmonton West Henday has risen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to rise to Bill 53, the Service Alberta Statutes Virtual Meetings Amendment Act 2021. And through my consultations with constituents and stakeholders across the province, it's very clear that this is an important piece of legislation, and I would just take a moment to point out that I believe, and our caucus believes, that this should have been implemented quite some time ago. We see in other jurisdictions, which I may get to later on in my speech, we see other jurisdictions that were able to do this before 2021 even arrived. And so when I think back to some of the conversations that I've had with, specifically with community league groups in my community who were very concerned about being able to adhere to their bylaws and ensure that processes were in place to support the, moving forward with their AGM through the pandemic, that it's unfortunate that we didn't see this come forward earlier. And once again, organizations have had to navigate these meetings and the requirements of the bylaws while balancing public health orders and recommendations for the past year. And so while I'm supportive of in principle, from what we can tell by the legislation so far, and I think that the stakeholders that I've spoken to, whether they're community leagues or nonprofits who must adhere to these rules of when and how their meetings happen, I think that everyone would have appreciated to see this quite some time earlier. I think that in terms of consultation process, I'm not sure that I saw any kind of formal public consultation on this legislation. I did hear from a few stakeholders through my consultations that they had heard of this legislation, though it came very quickly. And while there are some things that are going to be left to the regulations as far as we can tell, that overall they are supportive of this, but once again would have appreciated a better timeline. We do have a few questions. First of all, and the most glaring issue is, why did it take so long to implement or bring forward this legislation in the first place? We saw the ministerial order expire, and there is quite a large amount of time or time period between when that expiry happened and where we are now. And a lot of organizations have been looking for guidance. And once again, thinking back to some that came forward to me, had zero direction based on a lack of information coming from this government. There has been certain questions around concerns of privacy related to these meetings and having it easier for people to join these meetings online. While we can all appreciate that everyone has had to adjust, whether members in this House or organizations out in our community have had to adjust to this new normal for now, hopefully not for forever, but we've had to adjust to doing meetings online, which is understandable. But how are we going to handle privacy concerns? And as well as, how are we going to ensure that there's identification processes in place? So if there's, for instance, a condo board that is meeting and hoping to have their AGM, if certain members choose to take part virtually, or if they must take part virtually, how are we going to ensure that proper identification protocols are in place, ensuring that we know that the person who's saying they are is indeed that person, whether they own a unit or they are on the board? How are we going to ensure that there's processes in place to protect, first of all, protect their privacy and information, but also to ensure that they are who they say they are? We see some pieces in this legislation regarding the Red Tape Implementation Act, and I am thankful to the conversations that I was able to have with the minister during the technical briefing, and the ministry assured us that these are more housekeeping changes more than anything, that we see the Red Tape Implementation Act fit its way into this bill regarding a few things that no doubt we were concerned about when the Red Tape Implementation Act came forward. Specifically, when we look at page 5 of the legislation, regarding how Section 90 previously read, that 91 stipulates that at least 50% of the members of the board of every company shall be resident Albertans. And we were very clear that we had concerns about that specific line when that legislation came forward, and now we see it fit its way into this bill. And so I suppose we ask once again why that was necessary to move forward with that in the first place, but here we are. Just quickly, when we look at Bill 53, it's amending 5 acts to allow virtual meetings, electronic notifications for meetings, and electronic votings. It's amending the Business Corporations Act, the Companies Act, Condominium Property Act, Cooperatives, and the Societies Act. And once again, there are some housekeeping amendments due to the Red Tape Implementation Act. And so, while we see 5 pieces or acts being amended here, in each of those instances, it may interact differently with those pieces of legislation. And so we will most definitely be watching to ensure that whether we are talking about condominium owners or boards, whether we're talking about people who are affected by the Business Corporations Act or the Companies Act, that the legislation that we see here before us in Bill 53 is serving the purpose that it was set out to do in the first place. We have heard and see in the legislation that the bill is retroactive to August 15th, which is once again the end of that ministerial order. Between March 17th and August 14th, the ministerial order allowed organizations to meet online, which was a very important adjustment, and we're thankful that those considerations were made, because once again, I had community leagues in my own community and stakeholders wondering how exactly they were supposed to follow the public health guidelines and orders that were in place when the legislation and bylaws stated that they had to meet in person, or else it was an invalid meeting in the first place. So we're thankful that that happened. But once again, when we look at the time it's taken to implement this, and some of the other jurisdictions who have been able to do it as far back, I believe, as May of 2020, why we've waited so long. Now, I want to be clear. I've had some emails from constituents and other relevant stakeholders come in that were concerned about exactly potentially maybe a senior or somebody with a disability who wasn't able to join these meetings virtually, and we've been assured by the ministry that if a board so chooses, that they can set out bylaws that stipulate that these meetings need to continue in person, or that there's opportunities for people to be there in person and access those services, and those bylaws would supersede what we see in this legislation. And so I think that's an important point to make, and that's the reassurance that we've received from the ministry through the technical briefing. And just quickly looking at some of the acts that are being amended here, the Companies Act allows nonprofits to engage in business activities and sets out governance requirements. And once again, we see the Red Tape Implementation Act change that legislation, which is why I believe we see it included in here. But we continue to have concerns about the requirements around 50% of members of those boards being residents of Albertans, but I think that we've shared those concerns in the past, and not sure, as far as I know, if we're actually able to amend those, but we will have an opportunity to do that in future readings. I will leave it to you to consider the other acts that have been amended. But once again, when we look across Canada and across jurisdictional analysis, we see that BC also enacted a law in June of 2020 that allowed organizations to hold virtual meetings. They had enacted a ministerial order on April 21st, 2020 that allowed these meetings, but enacted into law when questions regarding the constitutionality of that ministerial order was raised. And so it's not that this is a new issue, but I believe indeed that the government here, the UCP government in Alberta, are quite late to the game, and it's unfortunate because there is a lot of people in the community who were concerned about this and were looking for guidance, and it's important that these meetings take place, especially now when we see the cuts that are coming through from this government and the unwillingness for this government to support, whether it's nonprofits in our community, whether it's community leagues, through recent conversations that I've had that are really struggling. And so once again, not only from a funding perspective are we seeing the government failing these Albertans and these organizations, but when we compare to other jurisdictions, whether it be BC, Ontario also, May 12, 2020, passed similar legislation to what we're seeing here. Many other jurisdictions beat us to the punch on this one, and it's unfortunate that we find ourselves here. But once again, Madam Chair, or Madam Speaker, we can appreciate that this is finally coming forward, and I think that in principle we definitely will be able to support this, recognizing that these communities or organizations in our community have been looking for answers, and finally we have some of them here in Bill 53. So with that, I imagine I will have further things to say as we move into readings and consider amendments to Bill 53, but with that I would thank you for the opportunity to rise to speak to Bill 53 today. Thank you.
Any members wishing to speak under Standing Order 29-2A? Seeing none. Any other members wishing to join debate? Question. Seeing none, I will. Answer's not here. All right. On the question of Bill 53 in second reading, the Service Alberta Statutes Virtual Meetings Amendment Act 2021. Does the Assembly agree to the motion for second reading? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried.
Bill 53, Service Alberta Statutes Virtual Meetings Amendment Act 2021 is now read a second time. Committee of the Whole.
It says right here. Oh, okay. Honorable members, I'd like to call Committee of the Whole to order. Committee of the Whole has under consideration Bill 59, the Appropriation Supplementary Supply Act 2021. Are there any members wishing to join debate? The Honorable Member for Lethbridge West.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thanks for the opportunity to speak to Bill 59 this afternoon, to provide some thoughts on supplementary supply as proposed by the Minister for Treasury, Board and Finance, and as part of a budget last year and ongoing quarterly updates that we've had over the course of 2020 to meet the needs of Albertans to, in the first instance, respond to the COVID-19 pandemic, and in the second instance to, as much as we could and have been able to recover from the economic shocks associated with the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, there is no question that the COVID-19 pandemic has provided significant challenges both to the overall fiscal situation, that is to say the revenue situation for the province of Alberta, as it has done for all industrialized countries, but not all COVID-19 economic response and recovery and eventual resilience strategies, plans, undertakings by government, whether it's at the national or subnational level, are indeed created equal, Madam Chair. And in fact, some have shown themselves to be quite effective at quite quickly recovering, responding, and then recovering economic growth and economic potential, whereas other jurisdictions lag significantly behind. And one of the ways that, in particular, for starters, that we have seen that leads to success is more quickly responding. And what we saw through 2020 and what the supplementary supply is designed to address is some of the public policy undertakings that this government took at a very late date. I'm thinking here of the commercial rent supplement program that took this government a full business quarter to figure out how they were going to bring legislation into this House, and finally did so in a much delayed fashion in July of 2020. I recall standing in this House debating that piece of legislation. So businesses were in a massive economic shock. And there is no question that certainly we had good faith criticisms of how the federal government rolled out that particular rent supplement program for commercial real estate renters and tenants, and certainly the government did too, and we shared some of those concerns, but that did not take away from the fact that it took them for, during an economic crisis for small business, a business quarter is an eternity. And it meant that so many businesses that shut down in March of 2020 have simply not opened back up. We all have, I think, businesses like that in our small businesses. The other, in our constituencies, rather, pardon me. So too, we do see in the supplementary supply provision for particular jobs efforts. I'm thinking here of the critical worker benefit, and we do see provision for that within this supplementary supply. Fantastic. What we're talking about there, I do not think that we need to break out the pom-poms to congratulate the government for simply showing up to do the job description many months after other jurisdictions did so. This is drumbeat of government stuff. If there is a federal government program worth hundreds of millions of dollars designed to put money in the pockets in a way that it will stimulate the local economy, the first priority should be to move those funds out into the economy, supporting the small businesses that I talked about just now who needed that commercial rent support. This government did no such thing, and instead they sat on that money for months on end, engaging in some sort of bureaucratic merry-go-round, trying to figure out if they could use it for politics or not, and was it, part of the ongoing saga of their interpretation of Canadian federalism or not. I can assure you, Madam Chair, that literally no one who has been serving people with developmental disabilities or bagging groceries or delivering prescriptions to elderly people or any of the other essential critical work that has been done in response to this pandemic, literally none of those people care about the palace intrigue of the various ins and outs and what have yous of, you know, little tiddly fights with Ottawa, when that money sat in somebody's figurative drawer in Treasury Board and Finance. So this moves that money out. How does it do so? In a way that creates a forest of paperwork and bureaucracy and hoops and other driving people who have been responding to the pandemic for now a year, just, you know, every available opportunity to drive them into a cul-de-sac of not being able to receive this benefit. The government took it. So yes, the money is moving via this mechanism of supplementary supply, but we have to ask ourselves why it is that it has taken so long and it has been such a bureaucratic disaster in its implementation. So too, there are provisions within this supplementary supply that provide a Alberta Jobs Now program. Well, that would be good. People would like Jobs Now. I think that the 2/3 of people who report to us that they don't like the Budget 2021 effort, that is what public opinion surveys are now showing, one of the reasons is because they do not see any jobs now. They see jobs maybe later as a product of an essay writing exercise that the government has undertaken in the fiscal plan. But what they don't see is jobs now. And out of this supplementary supply, while there is the $62 million to get out the door the next 4 business days, that is good. Hopefully it will go towards jobs now. But we see the problem here of not putting the training and apprenticeship and other mechanisms that are contained within labor market development agreements front and center in terms of our investment in people and the economy. We see here that this has dragged its feet for reasons of politics. And that is lamentable, Madam Chair, because we know the consequences in a province that has been hit hard by an economic downturn, that is suffering greatly throughout many places, in particular for people involved in the oil and gas industry and people in tourism and other service sectors. They too are waiting for that money to move in the next 4 business days, to be clear. $62 million, this is not inconsequential. Those folks too that are looking for Alberta Jobs Now programming, not Alberta Jobs maybe later, they too, and I believe Mr. Klein once said this in this chamber, they do not give a tinker's cuss about the various, palace intrigue between Ottawa and this legislature. They simply don't. They want a job. They want the top-up. The small businesses want the programs to stay in business. So while we are standing here having this lovely conversation about supplementary supply, that ultimately our caucus, obviously we support these COVID response and recovery programs, one must ask oneself what the actual substance of this vote and where this money is actually going and how it has been deployed out into the economy for the best effect of working people. And that is where we see a lot of delay, and we do not necessarily see the most, I would say, good faith engagement with public policy design, we see more of a priority on political gamesmanship. And that has had an economic effect. We are, in fact, 6th in terms of job creation this year, behind all of the larger economies and some others. We are set to make up the least amount of ground in all provinces when it comes to returning to pre-pandemic levels. This government is not forecasting our total number of Albertans employed to surpass 2017-18 levels until 2023. So the confidence being instilled by the economic programs put forward by this government, some of which are contained within this supplementary supply, is not even enjoyed by the government's fiscal plan itself. They themselves, in their own documents, show that the economy is not recovering as it should, nowhere near to the levels. It's taking 5 years to recover to 2017-18 levels in terms of total employment. Our unemployment rate remains double-digit, particularly in Calgary, and yet we are waiting until the very last minute, 4 days, that we have to get $62 million out the door for the jobs programs. A full business quarter for small business commercial rent programs. Just a storm of paperwork for people to get a few dollars an hour more for very, very difficult work, and so on. The other business assistance programs have been opaque. They have been late to the game in terms of their application process. It simply does not, perhaps the dollars are reflected in this supplementary supply, but the intention to help people is not, by what they have done, not what they have said. Madam Chair, in our business, we look more for what folks do, not what they say. A lot of things get said. And so the action is what is important. The action behind the proposal from the government in supplementary supply that has been put before the House here is actually what concerns us. And so with that, I will conclude my comments on this bill before the House, and thank you, Madam Chair, for the consideration of those thoughts.
Any other members wishing to join the debate? To see the Honourable Member for Calgary East.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise today to offer my support for Bill 59, the Appropriation or Supply Act. This act follows closely behind our government's creation of Budget 2021, a historic piece of legislation that promises funding to numerous sectors. This budget will both boost our economy and help Albertans weather this health crisis through 2021. While Budget 2021 covers the fiscal year of 2021 to 2022, the Supplementary Supply Act focuses on the current fiscal year between 2020 and 2021. This current fiscal year ends March 31st. We have found, Madam Chair, that there is a need for more funding to finish off our current fiscal year. While Budget 2021 is designed to support Albertans in the long term, this supplementary funding will save our province in the immediate term. I believe this funding is necessary because last year our revenue declined, our expenses increased. This was due to our province's response to the COVID-19 pandemic and the measures put in place to offer financial aid to Albertans and to support their well-being. Now, with this supplementary supply, we can continue to focus on improving the lives and livelihoods of Albertans. Madam Chair, Albertans are counting on us to provide the economic support and capital investment they need recovery financially and get back to work. They are also counting on us to fight this pandemic and in so doing promote health and economic recovery. There will be a time to balance the budget, and I hope this time comes soon. It is important to keep a balanced budget and to ensure we are not spending beyond our means. However, this time has not come yet. Before the pandemic, we were on the path towards economic stability. Of course, we had to shift our focus when the pandemic hit our province. However, even with the currently projected debt in Alberta, our provincial deficit is relatively low compared to the rest of the country. Right now, we need to focus on boosting the sectors that have been impacted the most by the pandemic and recession. The Supplementary Supply Act is a vital part of our current focus. This act includes funding towards health, children's services, education, and labor and immigration. In total, this bill proposes $1.3 billion in expense and a further $750,000 in capital investment. Madam Chair, this is excellent news for Albertans. Capital investment is an important component of economic recovery. By investing in capital projects such as infrastructure, we'll be bringing more direct and indirect jobs to Albertans. Madam Chair, Albertans have told us over and over again they want to get back to work. This year, as restrictions are slowly lifted, more and more Albertans have been able to do just that. With the added supplementary funding to capital projects, we will be able to further implement success in this area. Madam Chair, I'm pleased to note that the supplementary estimates also cover over $11 million in child care grants. Child care is a significant thing that many Albertans need to budget for. I am certain that this supplementary funding will give aid to working parents who rely on child care on a regular basis. But child care is only one of many factors of this act. Madam Chair, I'm pleased to be able to voice my support for this legislation. While I do not have time to discuss every component of this act and the funding it offers Albertans, I am confident that it will serve as a vital component of economic recovery. That is what Albertans need most. They need confidence in Alberta's government and the knowledge that our ministers have drafted a piece of legislation that meets their needs. Bill 59, or the Supplementary Supply Act, will just do that, Madam Chair. It will give Albertans what they need to complete the current fiscal year and continue forward through 2021 and 2022. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other members wishing to join debate? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Goldbar.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to rise and address Bill 59. I want to thank my colleagues from Lethbridge West and Calgary East for this interventions in this debate. And what a remarkable contrast in the comments from those two colleagues. I think my colleague from Lethbridge West has quite accurately set out the challenges that are facing this province. You know, and yet we hear the member from Calgary East counter with this mythical tale of Alberta being on the path to recovery, but if only for the pandemic. And what the member from Calgary East conveniently forgets, Madam Speaker, Madam Chair, is that 50,000 Albertans had lost their jobs long before the pandemic even hit. Oil prices were on their way to recovery, but we saw no capital investment coming back to the province. In fact, it dropped. And even the supposed measures that the government had tried to implement at the time, the multi-billion-dollar corporate tax cut, you know, these fictitious red tape battles that they fought, resulted in a net 50,000 jobs lost before the pandemic even hit. And now, things are really, really bad. Hundreds of thousands of people are out of work, right? But not only that, Madam Chair, almost 2,000 people have lost their lives unnecessarily to the COVID pandemic. Thousands more are sick right now, fighting for their lives. Thousands have not fully recovered from COVID. we know that long COVID is going to be a debilitating disease that thousands and thousands of Albertans are going to have to struggle with the rest of their lives. And this government has been completely unconcerned about tackling the COVID pandemic or the resulting economic crisis. And I think this bill is a record of their failure to deal with both of those things. And in fact, what's incredibly frustrating to me, Madam Chair, is not only has this government already demonstrated throughout the past year their inability and unwillingness to deal with the COVID-19 pandemic, they haven't learned their lessons from the past. Right now, as of March 16th, 479 new cases of COVID were reported. And a shocking number of those cases, Madam Chair, are the highly transmissive, highly fatal UK variant. That is becoming the dominant variant in this province. And it will result in a massive explosion in cases. We already see cases going up. What does the Premier and the government do? They give in to their tinfoil hat caucus in the government caucus, who believe that the lockdown was too restrictive and didn't work.
The Honourable Member for Cardston-Siksika.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise on 23 H, I, and J. The member calling the tinfoil hat caucus here, you know, language to cause disorder in this chamber, especially on a Thursday when we're all almost set to head back to our constituencies, some of them are closer than others, isn't necessary now or at any time. But this is not uncharacteristic for the member from Edmonton Gold Bar to say such things that do cause disorder in this chamber. And he thinks that because it's difficult to hear him, that he can get away with these kinds of comments. So I would ask that that member please retract those comments and apologize, and let's get through the rest of this day with some level of decorum.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton South.
Chair, certainly I think that we understand that in committee and certainly in this place we have a certain amount of latitude when we debate these bills, and certainly when we're debating the actions and records of certain members in this place and how it relates to these bills. We have seen in the past that certain members of this place have, in fact, spoken out against the current health restrictions and things like that. So Madam Chair, I would submit that in this case, even though it may be language that the honourable member does not appreciate, I think certainly this is simply a matter of debate, not a matter of, not a point of order. Thank you.
Honourable members. Honourable members. Order. It's certainly interesting when the debating of the point of order becomes more heated than the debate itself. However, honourable members, I appreciate the Thursday afternoon fun that we're having here. I would tend to agree that the language used by the honourable member for Edmonton Gold Bar is creating disorder in this House, and I would ask that the honourable member apologize to this assembly, withdraw the comments, and continue with his debate.
Madam Chair, I apologize and withdraw my comments. But while we were on the subject of apologies, there are 2,000 families of dead Albertans who are waiting for an apology from members of this government for their mishandling of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Order, Madam
and
Chair.
there is nothing
This is
forthcoming
absurd.
from them.
Cardston-Siksika.
Point of order, Madam Chair, 23H, I, and J. This is ridiculous, and there isn't a single member on that side of the aisle who should be able to condone this kind of language. And if the government House Leader, or rather the opposition Deputy House Leader, can get up and argue that that kind of language is appropriate today or any time, that's foolhardy and it's dangerous. That kind of language, and accepting that is ridiculous. Absolutely. That language should be apologized, retract, and this is the second time in what?
30 seconds.
30 seconds? It's absurd, Madam Chair.
The honourable member for Edmonton South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Certainly I understand that the government, the Deputy Government Whip here is certainly excited by the language being used here today. I did not see a citation of the standing orders when this was raised in this place. And Madam Chair, I think certainly that when we look at this, we'll seek your guidance and react accordingly. Thank you.
I think it's probably safe to say that the honourable member can stand up and withdraw and apologize his comments again.
Well, Madam Chair, I, out of respect for the position that you hold, I will apologize for my comments. But again, my point that I was making was that 2,000 people have unnecessarily died of COVID. This government is intentionally walking into a third wave, and this government refuses to learn its lessons and is subjecting thousands and thousands of Albertans for future suffering and death.
Madam Speaker, under 23I, imputing false motives, to say that we are intentionally walking into a third wave, I would strongly argue most definitely imputes false motives of this government. It is disgusting kind of language that no person in this province or this country should have to hear from an elected official.
The honourable member for Edmonton South.
Madam Chair, I think that this is well established that in this place, that when a member speaks around a group of members, such as a government caucus or the government, but not about individual members, that those types of statements around what may or may not be an allegation are, and as we saw in question period today, are sometimes walking that line, and it's very difficult, as the Speaker mentioned today in question period, to make a ruling on that matter. But certainly I think that this is a matter of debate and not a point of order.
Honourable members, I would tend to agree with the official opposition deputy House Leader in that this is a matter of debate. However, this is certainly not relevant to the debate in which we are on, which is Bill 59, the Appropriation Supplementary Supply Act 2021. I will be forced to move to another speaker if we continue to have matters that cause disorder in this House. So the Honourable Member for Edmonton-Goldbar, please continue with your debate on Bill 59.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair, for your ruling and your guidance. The point that I was trying to make is that this bill is a record of, is at least a partial financial record of this government's past failures to address the past COVID pandemic. And I think one of the things that we're being asked to vote on is a $323 million additional financial support for healthcare, which in the supplementary estimates document that was provided to us was supposed to be spent on additional testing, additional contact tracing, vaccine rollout, all of those things, Madam Chair. And I think there isn't a single Albertan who doesn't remember how incredibly difficult it was to find a COVID test in the early days of this pandemic. And in fact, even in October and November, when cases were going up to almost 2,000 cases a day, people had to stand in line, wait for up to a week to get a COVID test, wait for 3 or 4 days if they were lucky to get the results of that test. And while they were waiting at home, isolating from their school, isolating from their jobs, there was no support for them. Madam Chair, this money is not enough. We haven't seen contact tracing improve. Already, about half of the daily cases of COVID are from unknown sources. It's absolutely shocking, Madam Chair, how poorly this government has responded to COVID-19. And it's not just a healthcare crisis that this government has prolonged and created, it's an economic crisis as well. And we know this because there are comparator jurisdictions that have done a much better job of managing the COVID-19 crisis, and as a result, have much better economic prospects than our province does. One need only look at Australia and New Zealand. They have almost 0 cases of COVID currently. their economies are set to rebound. In fact, they've already have. I think the official unemployment rate in New Zealand right now is something like 4%. And I appreciate that you can't compare those directly because every jurisdiction collects unemployment rates on a different, using different methodologies. But I think the difference is stark enough that we know that this government has failed to protect Albertans' health.
McMurray Wood Buffalo.
Again, the members under the 23 HIJ is trying to instigate a lot of disrespect to our House and blaming our government for the current situation. I would challenge the member from across the way from Edmonton Gold Bar to reach out to their federal counterparts, as well as their best friends in the federal Liberal caucus, in understanding why Canada is in the situation where it is, because they've been inept at...
But we're not debating this matter. Perhaps the case for the point of order in which you called needs to be made first.
Say again now?
Just argue the point of order at hand and not the argument on the point of order. What is your point of order?
Again, that the member from Edmonton Gold Bar is commentary is and blame on this provincial government is disqualified. It's inaccurate, and the things that he's referring to actually are implications of what the federal government's decision-making and actions have been in regards to COVID. And I would challenge that his arguments and his attacks are unwarranted and should be targeted more towards the federal Liberal government and our Prime Minister. So the fact that he outright says it is our provincial government that is responsible for the current situation is highly inaccurate.
Okay. The Honourable Member for Edmonton South.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'd like to thank the member for his interjections, but I certainly don't think this is a point of order. It's a matter of debate. The member is clearly speaking to the programs and services that are being delivered under this bill and how they may or may not be affecting the response under the current emergency. Thank you.
Honourable members, I would tend to agree this is a matter of debate. I would challenge everyone in this assembly to make it 13 more minutes that this member has left to speak without another point of order from anybody or a need to have one. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Gold Bar, I challenge you with that.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair. It's remarkable to me that I have 13 minutes left. The past 7 have just flown by, shall we say?
It's kind of like vacations in Mexico.
But the point that I was making was that the healthcare spending that we are voting on right now was woefully inadequate to the task of managing the COVID-19 pandemic. There weren't enough COVID tests available. There weren't enough contact tracers available. There were almost no isolation supports available from the provincial government. And not only that, Madam Chair, there's nothing, of course, that the government has done to indicate that they've learned from their mistakes and are fixing them. And the point that I was trying to make, and repeatedly, is that it would have been nice if the government would at least have presented this bill and said, you know what, yes, we should have spent more than $323 million on a healthcare system. We've learned our mistakes. We are sincere about our efforts to protect Albertans from the COVID-19 virus, and we're going to do better in the future. But of course, they didn't do that. Now, I want to turn my attention now to the child care spending that is included in this bill. Which includes $11.5 million that has been issued for a one-time rebate to Albertans who have their kids in childcare. And I want to thank my friend from Edmonton Whitemud for her excellent advocacy on the issues of childcare, particularly through the COVID pandemic, but pre-COVID pandemic and post-COVID pandemic that are facing Albertans with young children right now. When the minister announced her woefully inadequate childcare rebate that we're voting here on here in this bill, my friend from Edmonton Whitemud quite succinctly stated that a one-time payment is not a childcare system. And she was completely accurate on that point. And she's not alone in her position that in order for Albertans to have a meaningful economic recovery, every family has to have all members be able to participate meaningfully in that economic recovery. And that means readily accessible, dependable, affordable childcare. We've heard it from childcare advocates for decades that this is an issue that has held Alberta families back. But now we're even starting to hear it from places like the Edmonton Chamber of Commerce, the Calgary Chamber of Commerce. I think even the Business Council of Alberta in their latest documents stated that they are in favor of affordable, accessible childcare for the province of Alberta. We know from the statistics that women have been hit harder than men by the economic crisis that has been created by the COVID-19 pandemic. And Alberta women have been hit harder than women in other parts of the country, due in no small part because of our failure to provide adequate, affordable childcare. So for this minister to announce an $11.5 million program that will grant families a one-time rebate is a real slap in the face, in my opinion, to families who are struggling to make ends meet and need help from the rest of our community in providing affordable and accessible childcare. If this government were serious about investing in the things that Alberta needs to recover from the economic crisis that has been caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, they would be investing serious money in making sure that childcare is available to everyone. And I know that we've heard from members opposite concern that if we spend a little bit of money on childcare, well, maybe some families in the upper income brackets will accidentally get something that they don't deserve. Which is shocking, Madam Chair, that the governments in this case are really concerned that somebody who might make more than $75,000 a year is getting government money. Because we hear no such concern when they pass a $4.7 billion tax cut that only benefits people in the upper income brackets. We hear no concern when the government spends untold billions on the Keystone XL pipeline, which isn't getting built. All of that money ends up in TC Energy shareholders' pockets. Where's the outrage on the spending of government money on rich people in that case? It's peanuts. And I hear the member for Lac St. Anne Parkland saying that some of that money is going to welders, and some of it did. Most of it went to TC Energy shareholders. So I wish the government caucus would stop holding up working Albertans as their shield behind which they hide when they're shoveling money, billions and billions of dollars, into the pockets of the wealthiest Albertans and foreign-owned corporations. It's offensive. So I urge the government to reconsider its past actions on childcare, their failure to address the serious childcare crisis that is in this province, and commit to providing all Albertans with affordable, accessible childcare, because we cannot have a meaningful economic recovery that includes everybody without that program in place. Now, one of the final things that I want to mention in my comments today is the Sport and Cultural Event Relaunch Program, which targeted $14.7 million for that particular program. All in all, I think that was mostly good news. But I do have to say that on behalf of a number of my constituents, there were some glaring omissions in that program that will have significant impacts on the community of Edmonton Gold Bar. Namely, the fact that curling clubs were left out of the program. Now, I have 2 curling clubs in the constituency of Edmonton Gold Bar, Shamrock and Otwell Curling Club. And Madam Chair, it's been pleasantly surprising to me to see the growing popularity that curling has enjoyed over the past few years. And in fact, a couple of years ago, I had the opportunity to be a substitute on a team that was playing in a bonspiel at the Shamrock Curling League. And much to my shock, I was one of the oldest guys on the ice. So it's very encouraging to me that all of these unruly youngsters are learning to curl. But part of the problem, Madam Chair, is that these curling clubs have been incurring incredible expenses because the government hasn't been clear to them what their future was going to be throughout the pandemic. Now, when the government finally, after much delay, announced widespread public health measures to control the spread of COVID-19 in December, curling clubs had to shut down. But they were never clearly told when and under what conditions they could reopen, and so they left their equipment running, and they left the ice in. And this has cost them hundreds of thousands of dollars a month. The members haven't been able to curl, and the Shamrock on the Otwell curling clubs basically had to go back to their members and beg them on bended knee to forego their membership fees this year just to help curling clubs through their time of crisis. It would have been nice, Madam Chair, if the Minister of Culture, Multiculturalism and Status of Women had given a thought about supporting curling clubs through the Sporting and Cultural Event Relaunch Program. Because the Shamrock and Otwell curling clubs are left with a massive financial hole that they have they don't know how they're going to fill it, Madam Chair. And it certainly would have been nice if the minister had given some consideration to the curlers in my riding, and I suspect all across the province, when they had rolled out this relaunch program. I would suspect that curling is probably one of the most popular sports in Alberta by rates of participation. We want to make sure that our curling clubs are able to function once the pandemic is over, and it would have been excellent if the government had provided meaningful financial support to curling clubs in my riding as well as across the province. But of course, the government had other priorities, and curling clubs and curlers are forgotten once again. So, Madam Chair, just a time check. 2 minutes left. In summation, as I said, we are voting on at least a partial record of incredible failure on the part of this government to deal with the health and the economic crises that have been caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen woefully inadequate health care spending. We've seen woefully inadequate child care spending. We've seen woefully inadequate spending to help sporting clubs and cultural clubs in my riding and all across this province. And there is no sign from this bill or any of the other messages that are coming from the government that they've learned their lesson and are going to take any meaningful action to deal with these crises and make sure that Albertans are in the strongest position possible to recover from COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honourable Member. I see the Honourable Member for Fort McMurray-Lac-La-Biche.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is spectacular to be able to get up and speak today to Bill 59 in the Committee of the Whole. I know for myself, when I speak to students, one of the favorite stories that they love to hear, no matter whether they're here in the legislature or if I'm talking to them back in the riding or in this virtual time doing virtual meetings, is telling them about the legislature cheeseburger. It's probably one of the stories that the students connect with the most, and they're really always curious to go and see the cheeseburger. And one of the reasons why I bring up the cheeseburger story is the fact that it came to be because the cheeseburger was tabled during a debate around supplementary supply. And so I then explained to the students how the budgetary process works at the legislature, how money is spent, and how if we end up spending money outside of what we had voted for in the budget, we have to bring in supply bills because every dollar has to be voted on in the legislature. And so it's a really cool story that teaches the kids about how some of the mechanics of how the legislature works. And so every time I see supply, since that point of learning about the cheeseburger story, I share that with the students, and it typically actually helps them remember a little bit more about the process that we follow here. And I think it's so important to remember that these debates matter. These debates can go in history. Here I am talking about something that happened in a supply debate over 60 years ago, and it's still relevant. It's still important because every dollar that is spent by the government of Alberta is important, because that isn't just government dollars, that's dollars that belong to the taxpayers, and each and every one of us is a taxpayer. And so one of the things that I think is really key to highlight is we did not expect the pandemic nor the absolute drop in oil revenue when the last budget came out in 2020. Those were not items that were necessarily well known or anticipated at the time. And so as a result, there was some additional spending that had to be made by the government of Alberta to be able to serve Albertans and to be able to make sure that we were meeting the needs of Albertans all across this province. And one of the pieces that I'm wanting to highlight is 373 million of the 381 million in the supplementary funding for jobs, economy, and innovation went to the Small and Medium Enterprise Relaunch Grant. And this relaunch grant offered financial assistance to businesses throughout Alberta that were ordered to close or to curtail their operations in some form, or that saw reduced revenues as a result of the economic times we were facing. And so it got rolled out in multiple phases, and it offered up to $20,000 in funding for organizations established before February 10th of 2020. And it included unregistered sole proprietors, it included a series of different types of businesses. And one of the reasons why I highlight this is because in the last few months, this was the biggest piece as I've gone and visited with businesses throughout my riding, whether it be restaurants, dance schools, martial arts clubs, small businesses, medium-sized businesses of all different wakes, shapes and forms. One of the big pieces I have come to see was, and hear directly from the business owners, was how important the relaunch grant was for them to get back on track, to be able to either buy the supplies needed to be able to comply with the new COVID protocols. I know when I went into my hair salon, and I'm pretty lucky, I have a pretty fresh haircut, Mrs. Chair, and when I was in my hair salon and chatting with my hairdresser, she was telling me about how important these relaunch grants were to the operation of her business, and how they really did help her prepare for what the COVID reality was and make up for some of the loss of revenue that she faced having been shut down for a period of time. And in total, 174 businesses within my riding of Fort McMurray-Lac-La-Biche ended up receiving funding in the first round of the relaunch grant. And that is absolutely spectacular. And one of the things that we tried to do actually in my office is I had my office staff reach out to every business that we could find that was within my riding that we thought might have been impacted by the restrictions. So whether it be a hair salon or a tanning studio, a dance school, martial arts club, a gym, restaurants, and we tried to contact each and every one of those businesses and let them know of the different supports available to them through the Government of Alberta, as well as through the federal government, to ensure that our businesses had the supports they needed so that they could get back on their feet and get back to serving Albertans. And it's been one of the pleasures I've had. I'm not sure how many people follow my social media, but I've started to go to a variety of different restaurants, particularly throughout my riding. And many of these restaurants I'd gone to before, but prior to the pandemic, I actually cooked at home a lot and ate at home a lot. And during the pandemic, we kind of got more into the cooking. And so one of the big pieces that we've done since restaurants have been allowed to reopen to in-person dining was making a concerted effort to have date night and go out to some of the different amazing restaurants throughout my riding and explore them, chat with the business owners, chat with the servers, see how they were doing. And one of the common themes was how many business owners or managers, servers, mentioned the importance that they had in the relaunch grant and how important it was for the overall operation of their business. And so for that, I really want to thank the Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation for putting forward such an innovative solution to this problem and for really listening to the needs of Albertan business owners. And it really was wonderful. And as the different phases have gone through, this program has continued to evolve to really accommodate the needs of Alberta business owners. And I think that it's really benefited business owners throughout every single riding in Alberta. Just one of the things in Bill 59, it was needed to help make sure that the government could, the supplementary supply in general was trying to make it so that Alberta government could achieve the goals of Albertans during these unprecedented times, and making sure that we were taking the actions that we needed to take in order to protect the lives and livelihoods of Albertans all across the province. Because for so many of us, it was really unprecedented times. And so the government has definitely stepped up, and we've definitely put a historic amount of investments to ensure that we were protecting the lives and livelihoods of Albertans. And the bill requests in total an additional $1.3 billion in expenses, which also included $750 million in capital investments. And the capital investments piece was one of the fun parts of the supply, because we took the supply dollars and we looked at some of the projects that were needed, whether it be in capital maintenance and renewal, whether it be in transportation, and we accelerated those projects so that we could, A, get Albertans back to work as soon as possible, but that we were also building critical infrastructure pieces or maintaining our critical infrastructure so that it would not just benefit us today, but it would benefit generations of Albertans, because we all know that if your road is in really bad condition, you might have a little less traffic. And if you have less traffic, you have less business. And if you have less business, you make less money. And so one of the key pieces of our accelerated capital maintenance program was really trying to ensure that we were doing what we needed to do to get Albertans back to where we needed to be, so that we were ultimately just protecting the lives and livelihoods. And we've made some large gains over the last few months. And I really am proud of all of the work of this government has done to find that balance and push things forward despite being in these very difficult times. And I really thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Whitemud.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's a pleasure to rise and speak to Bill 59 today and in Committee of the Whole. I want to begin by just commenting that during these COVID times, of course, as elected officials, we have additional responsibilities to role model health and safety regulations. And I do have to put on the record, Madam Chair, that I've noticed some members having difficulties understanding how to wear their mask over their nose. And so I'd like to remind all members that that is certainly an important responsibility, not only for modeling behavior, but also for the safety of all the members here and the staff who are here today. So with respect to Bill 59, I also would like to speak to a number of the comments that my colleagues have mentioned a number of times, and really what we see with this supplementary supply bill. And I appreciate the comments from the former member from Fort McMurray-Lac-La-Biche when she sort of gave a little bit of a history about supplementary supply. And really, for those who may not know and who may be following along, it really is, when we see a supplementary supply bill, it's really the government saying that whatever is existing in their current ministry budgets, they need additional funds in those budgets. So when we see the specifics of the estimates that were put forward for the supplementary supply, it's really those individual ministries indicating that they need additional dollars than were originally approved in the budget for 2020-21. And so that's what we're focusing on here, these additional asks into each ministry's budget from the General Revenue Fund. And what we see, and I think I'd like to single out the comments from the member from Lethbridge West, who very eloquently described this sort of scrambling that we're seeing with respect to this supplementary supply bill. What we're seeing with what was presented to this Assembly is the current government scrambling to do the things that they should have been doing all along. And partially, some of that is around accessing federal funds. And of course, a lot of the federal fund programs, not all of it, but many of them had requirements around matching provincial dollars, right? So a number of the programs and supports that came from the federal government required the provincial government to put in dollars to match that. And that's why we're seeing some moving around. And what is remarkable, though, is how much of this is sort of scrambling at the last minute. And you would think that the government had just been elected and wasn't, I mean, certainly the pandemic caught all governments off guard. But we are well into this, and much of what we have experienced over the last year in the first few months was certainly challenging and hard to predict. But certainly as we got through into the summer of 2020, everybody was talking about the impact of the second wave and what was coming. Well, everybody except this current government. And so we see a lot of that lack of preparation now reflected in the supplementary supply bill, because that's the only explanation I can have as to why we are seeing mere days before the end of this budget year. Now we're seeing a Jobs Now plan that's actually unfunded up until March. It's currently March 18th, Madam Chair, and they have no plan. I watched, I'm sure many Albertans watched with great interest as the members of this House debated the details of the supplementary supply bill, and it was absolutely remarkable to hear the Minister of Finance and the Minister of Labour and Immigration stand up and basically admit that their Jobs Now plan is not finished. I can't even imagine why they have not even begun this jobs plan months ago. We know that the federal funding that is related to the dollars that are being rolled out now was actually announced and available in December of 2020. And yet here we are 3 months later, and the current government still has not settled on the details of that program. The Minister of Labour and Immigration stood up repeatedly and said, here we are, less than 2 weeks before the end of the fiscal year, and we're asking this House's permission, the Legislative Assembly's permission, for an additional $62 million that we promise will go out the door in less than 2 weeks on a program that has not been settled, has not been announced, but somehow that $62 million was going to magically go out the door in less than 2 weeks. I mean, it's been 2 days since that debate, and we still don't have any more details on that Jobs Now plan, which really means, and I give full credit to my colleague, the member for Lethbridge West, who said this is not a Jobs Now plan. It's a jobs maybe later. And given this government's track record to date, it's a jobs never. That's really what we're looking at, because I cannot believe that here we are a year into this pandemic and the government still hasn't decided on what their jobs plan is. We saw 1,000 Calgarians laid off earlier this week in a move that many of us saw coming. Again, members of the opposition, when we heard the announcements last year about what was happening with Husky and Cenovus, we all saw this was coming, and the Minister of Energy at that time was optimistic that somehow the right thing would happen. They'd do the good thing, that Husky wouldn't pocket those millions of dollars from the corporate handout that the government gave them and would still somehow create jobs. But no, to the surprise of many, and again, the members of the government often stand up and claim that they seem to understand better than anybody else what's going on in the province. Everybody saw that coming, but this government apparently. So 1,000 Calgarians just this week laid off. And this government still doesn't have a jobs plan? And they're standing before this assembly less than 2 weeks before the end of the fiscal year and saying, we promise we're going to get $62 million out the door for retraining from a program that's been available for months? And yet there's still no announcement? This government has been scrambling from day one. They do not see, and frankly, Madam Chair, it's shocking to me because even we, as the official opposition, we're a third the number of members as the government caucus. We don't have the apparatus of government behind us. And yet we have been engaged in a detailed consultation and proposal process for Alberta's future. We've been talking about economic policy for post-pandemic recovery for well over 6 months at this point. And yet this government, 2 weeks before the end of the fiscal year, still doesn't have anything for their Jobs Now plan. This is scrambling. This is not a government that has given any real thought to what the pandemic recovery is going to look like. And that's likely because they're in denial about a lot of the facts around the pandemic. And that leads me to my second concern, Madam Chair, around this supplementary supply bill. And I've spoken at length in this House about it. And my colleagues have spoken at length in this House about it, about the facts of this pandemic, about the impact and who's feeling it. And it's women. And particularly, Madam Chair, it is women of young children. So we can debate the statistics about, which province is worse, and are we looking at national levels, but there's no doubt about it that working mothers of young children have been hit hardest. Now, perhaps in the government's eyes, this group of Albertans is just a niche group. Maybe they're a special interest group. So that's why they find it so easy to ignore this group of Albertans. But they are an economic driver of this province. Working mothers and fathers, but let's be clear, it is working mothers who have been hit hardest, we cannot simply just turn a blind eye and pretend that we don't care. And perhaps there's ideological reasons, perhaps there's, different values that go around, and maybe in some Albertans' world it would be nice. And I appreciate there are some families who make the choice to have a parent, and usually the mother, stay home with the children, and that's great. And it's great if it's a choice, if it's a real, genuine choice about the way they want to raise their children and what they want to do. But that is not the reality that working parents face in this province. We do not live in the 1950s anymore. Most parents need to work. Most households require 2 parents to work. And even if they can't afford for a period of time that one parent stays out of the workforce, you know what? That has economic implications for us all. Because when we ignore full participation of women in the workforce, we are basically saying we do not care about economic growth. So there is perhaps, I believe actually, in my heart, I believe that there are ideological reasons for why this government is ignoring the impact of this pandemic on women. I believe they just do not value women's participation in the workforce the same way that other people do. And that's fine, except for that there's economic implications for the entire province when that's the case. And so when I see the supplementary supply bill, and I see a request for $11.5 million from General Revenue Fund into the Children's Services budget for the one-time payment of the working parents benefit, it boggles my mind, Madam Chair. It boggles my mind that this government has taken a quarter of their annual childcare budget and then asked for additional dollars. And instead of investing it into what would make the most difference for the most Albertans, which is what I was calling for, what my members of my colleagues, the official opposition, have repeatedly been calling for, is investment. And you know, it boggles my mind, Madam Chair, and I've said that a few times now, because that's how it feels, is that this government claims to be, you know, I guess they think that they have the upper hand, or they have great knowledge around the economy, but yet they keep throwing away dollars. They throw dollars away on a pipeline that, while we would have liked it to have been built, all the cards were showing it wasn't going to be. It was for posturing, it was for show, billions of dollars. They threw it away here on a working parent's benefit, covering the cost of 2 weeks of childcare for most parents in this province. Gone. That payment will come out April 1st in prepaid Visa cards, I'm understanding, which of course begs the question of whether or not the Minister of Children's Services is aware that most childcare centres don't even take Visa. But anyways, they're going to come out in prepaid Visa cards, and they will perhaps be able to pay for not their childcare fees, but something else. So 2 weeks worth of childcare, and gone. And then the next month, childcare centres across the province, we just heard it today, their fees are going up. In Calgary, families are going to be paying. And let me be clear, these are families who are not going to be eligible not only for subsidies, but they're not even eligible for this working parent benefit. Families making more than $100,000 in household income. They're going to be spending 43% of their take-home pay if they have 2 children in childcare per month. That's an average. That's the average, using the average cost of childcare, which is $1,250 per month. But in reality, many parents are paying much more than that in Calgary. It is not unheard of to hear of parents having to pay $1,900, $2,000 per month per child. It simply is a waste of money to take millions of dollars, a quarter of the budget, and simply throw it away and then ask for $11.5 million more. And I actually have to get on the record here, Madam Chair, on the supplementary supply debates, because I was puzzled when I listened to the Minister of Children's Services' explanation for this request for $11.5 million for childcare rebates. Because as we know, supplementary supply is about asking for additional funds from the General Revenue Fund. It's not about moving money around within your own budget if you're a minister, right? You can do that. You have the authority as a minister to move money around within your own budget. We know that happened a lot during the pandemic. And yet when the minister was asked to explain why she was requesting $11.5 million from General Revenue Fund, she said that she was doing because she was moving it from line 3.2 to line 3.1 of her budget, which again, you don't have to do that through supplementary supply. And I question where that $11.5 million is really coming from, because it must be coming from the General Revenue Fund. That's what supplementary supply is for. So the Minister of Children's Services has asked for $11.5 million from the General Revenue Fund beyond her own budget to go towards childcare rebates. Well, you know what goes into the General Revenue Fund, Madam Chair? You probably do know. But a lot of things. But one of the things that goes into the General Revenue Fund is federal funding. And in this past year, we've seen the federal government, when it comes to childcare, carry the weight of supporting Alberta's working parents and children in our childcare sector. 83% of the funding that went to keep childcare centres barely alive over this past year has come from the federal government. So there's been a lot of federal dollars that have gone into the General Revenue Fund. And so when I hear that 11.5 is being taken out, my guess is for childcare it's probably coming from federal funding. And I just have to raise that because federal funding for childcare is keeping this system afloat. And I've heard this government stand up over and over and over and over again and talk about how we want to chart our own path, our own Alberta way forward. But yet when it comes to certain things like childcare, like the critical worker benefit, which is another example, Madam Chair, of a program that was scrambling at the last minute to get out the door. It's being done haphazardly. We're seeing people who are on the front lines doing work being cut off for arbitrary reasons. It's months late. But this is all of a sudden, when it comes to actually helping people, this government's nowhere to be seen. They're happy to say thanks to their good buddy Justin Trudeau about that. Then they're pretty happy to take federal dollars, right? When it's actually going towards supporting people. when it's going towards supporting parents and children, then their hands are wide open. So I have a lot of questions about this supplementary supply bill and why none of these plannings for critical care workers, which is available for 9 months, we've had that program available. The Jobs Now funding, what a joke. It's been available, the negotiation, for months. And this government, here we are 2 months before the end of the fiscal year, and they still don't have a plan? How could they have rolled out a new budget, introduced a new budget for economic recovery, as they say, without a plan for jobs? I simply do not understand it, because I looked at their budget 2021 and I didn't see a plan for jobs, because they don't care about, there's huge sectors of this population that they don't care about when it comes to jobs. And then they can't even roll out a Jobs Now plan. It's a Jobs Maybe Later plan. So this supplementary supply bill, I have no problems. I will not be ashamed to stand up and vote against this bill, because it is a disaster, and it reflects that this government has showed that they are not following what they're supposed to be doing. They don't have a plan. Now, the only reason that would keep me from voting against this is because I do think that these individuals and these Albertans need to get those dollars. But in spirit, this is a bill that shows a failure by this government, scrambling at the last minute every second. So be clear. Let's be clear. This is not a good bill. It does not reflect this government has thought through what we've all been experiencing for the past year. What it does show is that we need to get dollars out the door because this government has left it to them last minute. So we will need to get dollars out the door to Albertans because they failed.
Under Standing Order 64 sub 4, the Chair of the Committee of the Whole shall immediately put a single question proposing the approval of every appropriation bill, then standing referred to the committee, which shall be decided without debate or amendment, and the committee shall immediately rise and report. So, pursuant to Standing Order 64-4, I must now put the following question. Does the committee approve the following bill, Bill 59, Appropriation Supplementary Supply Act 2021? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried. Honourable members, pursuant to Standing Order 64-4, the committee shall now rise and report.
Madam Speaker, the committee... Oh, sorry.
Member for Banff Kananaskis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. The Committee of the Whole has under consideration certain bills. The committee reports the following bills with some amendments. Bill 59. Madam Speaker, I wish to table copies of all amendments considered by the Committee of the Whole on this date for the official records of the Assembly.
Does the Assembly concur in the report? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried. The Honourable Minister of Jobs, Economy and Innovation.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. We've had a very busy week here. I move that the Assembly adjourn until 1:30 p.m. on Monday, March 22nd, 2021.
Having heard that motion, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried. House stands adjourned until Monday, 1:30.